Hey guys, tonight we drop into a time when powdered wigs weren't just fashion. They were armor in a battlefield of gossip, where rumors could crown you king or strip you naked in front of London's most judgmental eyes. You're standing at the edge of a cobblestone alley in Soho, and the fog's so thick it feels like the city is trying to hide something from you, something sinful. A drunk nobleman in a velvet coat stumbles past, humming a tune half nursery rhyme, half scandalous limerick. You follow the smell of roasted chestnuts and cheap perfume toward a coffee house glowing with candlelight, its window fogged with sweat and smoke. Inside, whispers bounce from one powdered head to another like the world's worst game of telephone. That man hunched over a newspaper? He's reading about a duke's affair with an opera singer who just last week was the toast of the town and now might be pregnant. And the woman across from him? She wrote the pamphlet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel it the moment your boots hit the muddy street. Georgian London wants to tell you. It's secrets, but it's going to make you work for them. Every whisper here has a price. The year is 1781. George III sits on the throne, madness not yet diagnosed, but gossip already dripping from the royal upholstery. The American colonies have said, boy, bye, and now the British elite need something else to obsess over. And oh, do they find it in your neighbor's bedroom, your rival's wardrobe, your enemy's love letters? Nothing is sacred, especially not sex. The thing is, you live in a time when there's no reality TV, no Twitter, no tabloid photographers, but human nature, still the same messy soup. So what happens when people want scandal but can't tweet it? They print it, they stage it, they weaponize it. And in a city teeming with gin, lice, and heartbreak, the dirtiest gossip spreads faster than fire in a wooden theater. You duck into a coffee house near Covent Garden, your coat still damp from the drizzle. It smells like overcooked meat, pipe smoke, and ink, because here, gentlemen debate politics, sure, but they also casually dissect which duchess got caught entertaining her footman in the stables. You overhear one man mock the Earl of Sandwich, who apparently prefers his mistresses with more muscle than modesty. Across the room, a radical pamphleteer scribbles furiously, immortalizing the scandal on cheap paper, destined to be sold for a penny by street urchins yelling, "Shocking confessions of a baroness." There's a chill that never leaves your bones, not from the weather, but from the realization that no one here is safe from exposure. Not even you. Your eyes catch a familiar name in one of those crumpled broadsheets, your friend's uncle, accused of a liaison with an actress who swore off nobility last season. The article calls it an affair of culture, but everyone knows it's a euphemism for he paid for poetry, but stayed for the company. The Georgian era isn't just a time of powdered wigs and polite society. It's a pressure cooker of hypocrisy, sensuality, and political games disguised as drawing room chatter. The clothes are tight, the morals looser, and you start to notice a pattern. The juicier the gossip, the more it props up the very people it should take down. Historians still argue whether gossip served as a hidden weapon for the powerless or a self-reinforcing loop of elite decadence. What's certain is that it gave rise to a public addicted to scandal and a media ecosystem built to feed it. Take Kitty Fisher, for example. Her name dances through every parlor like a forbidden spell. Born poor, risen by beauty, she plays the London press like a fiddle. Every time she's spotted with a new lover, be it lord, painter, or soldier, it's not shame but elevation. She leaks stories herself. One satirical engraving shows her riding a cannon in full court dress. Subtlety, not invited. One night, she dines publicly on a £100 banknote just to prove a point. She has more money and more nerve than the men trying to buy her silence. You wonder if that scandal was even real, or just a rumor she ignited herself. Because in Georgian London, the best way to stay relevant is to stay whispered about. That's the other trick. There's a whole economy running on secrets. Printers, illustrators, maids, valets, each one a potential spy with a tale to sell. And the public, they can't get enough. It's not just the elite who are reading these scandal sheets. It's the butcher's daughter and the sailor on leave. Sex sells, even if it's dressed up in metaphor and smirks. One of the more popular series is called The Covent Garden Journal, which claims to offer theater reviews but actually devotes more ink to who's sleeping with whom in the opera boxes than who's singing on stage. And that's where things start to get strange. See, you're not just reading gossip, you're living in a city designed to generate it. The architecture betrays it. Hidden doors in brothels lead straight to alley exits. Private clubs with no names have secret knock codes. There are men who make a living painting erotic scenes on snuff boxes, then selling them to bored lords at parties. And that powdered old man across the coffee house? He's actually a sex diarist chronicling his conquests with more literary flair than moral compass. One of his entries reads, "Met the widow again. Her ankles were divinely unrepentant." Even the church isn't immune. One scandal that lights up the town involves a clergyman caught in bed with a choir boy and a bottle of brandy. The scandal breaks just in time for the bishop's birthday. Historians still debate the authenticity of the letters found beneath the altar, but the public doesn't care. They lap it up like dogs under the banquet table. Because here, morality is flexible, reputation is currency, and your greatest sin might be getting caught without a clever enough excuse. But maybe the weirdest detail? Some Georgian women used crocodile dung as contraceptive. That's not gossip, that's historical fact. We mention it now because it says something about how desperation, science, and secrecy all intermingled in a society obsessed with appearances, but addicted to what happens behind closed doors. And once that door creaks open, the whole neighborhood leans in to listen. You head back into the street, and the city hums with energy not from carriages or foot traffic, but from conversations happening just below polite volume. A whisper in the street here, a wink in the theater there, a chuckle behind a fan. This place runs on tension, the unbearable electricity between what's said and what's meant, what's done and what's denied. And tonight, you've stepped right into the current. You push open the warped wooden door of Button's Coffee House, and the smell hits you: first burnt sugar, wet wool, and something earthy like old paper and anxious ambition. The place is dim, and the windows are weeping with condensation, but that doesn't stop the room from buzzing. You're not here for a caffeine fix. You're here because this is where lives are ruined in whispers and reborn in pamphlets. At a rickety corner table, a man in a frayed coat scribbles madly on cheap paper, the ink on his fingers practically a badge of honor. That's not a poet, it's a political assassin with a rhyming dictionary. You slide into the background, just close enough to listen. He's mocking Lord Sandwich again. Apparently, the poor man's latest mistress was also his goddaughter's piano teacher, which makes for uncomfortable family duets. Across from him, a printer nods, already estimating how many copies he can sell by Tuesday. Because here's the thing, the gossip doesn't just stay within these walls. It gets typeset, inked, and shouted by boys with no shoes and very little shame. Lord's lover, a lady, or a lie. They'll cry, waving fresh sheets in every market square. You don't need to be literate to know what's being sold. The drawings do most of the heavy lifting: women with absurdly perky bosoms and men caught mid-faint, often in compromising states of undress. It's not even pretending to be subtle. This isn't news, it's sex wrapped in satire and dipped in political vendetta. The Georgian Coffee House isn't a Starbucks with wigs, it's the first newsroom, the first Twitter thread, the first unfiltered group chat, where the tea is always piping and someone's always about to get canceled. And here's where it gets personal. One of the regulars at this very establishment is none other than Alexander Pope, the poet with a curved spine and a sharper pen. He's got beef with half the nobility and the vocabulary to make it sting. One day he writes a verse about a lady's stolen lock of hair. The next he's tearing into the Duchess of Marlborough for her whorish ambition. And yet people keep inviting him to parties. Why? Because if you're not in his poetry, you may as well not exist. Being scandalized by Pope was a status symbol of backhanded blessing, like getting roasted by a late-night host. Historians still argue whether his barbs were more social critique or personal revenge. But either way, he knew the game. Sex sells. But scandal sells better. Outside the coffee houses, the street hawkers get more theatrical. One man shouts that a baron has married a milkmaid disguised as a countess. Another swears he saw the Archbishop of Canterbury in a tavern with a French actress and a suspiciously large hatbox. Are they true? Probably not. Do they matter? Not even a little. You begin to realize that Georgian London doesn't care about truth. It cares about narrative. And the more lurid, the better. These stories operate like fan fiction with real stakes. One wrong pamphlet and your reputation's ash. But survive it, profit. The papers might destroy your honor, but they'll double your box office sales. Actresses learned that early. Lavinia Fenton, once a tavern singer, becomes famous after playing Polly Peachum in Cocteau Peachum in Fenton. The Beggar's Opera, but what really launches her career? The rumor that she slept with the Duke and bore his illegitimate child backstage. Her scandal eclipses her performance, and the audience loves her more for it. Georgian fans want you messy and magnificent. If your personal life isn't in shambles, are you even working hard enough? Now, over in a corner, a gentleman in black is reading something quietly. You lean closer. It's an erotic novella disguised as a moral tract. A warning against carnal excess, it claims. By page 3, it's already into corsets and candle wax. The hypocrisy isn't even hidden, it's baked into the genre. Sex in Georgian literature is never just about sex. It's a Trojan horse for politics, class, religion, even colonial anxiety. Scholars still debate whether the explosion of sexual content during this period was a true cultural shift or simply a clever distraction from more pressing social rot. Because while readers are clutching their pearls over a duchess's indiscretion, Parliament is quietly raising taxes, and the East India Company is getting up to all kinds of unspeakable things overseas. Scandal becomes the national pastime. Sleight of hand so brilliant, you don't even see what you're being distracted from. And then you meet Mary Toft. Her story isn't sexual, but it might be the most absurd fringe tale in this whole gossip ecosystem. In 1726, she convinces half of England that she's given birth to rabbits. Real, hopping rabbits. Doctors, actual doctors, inspect her. They write papers. The king sends his surgeon. Turns out, she's been stuffing dead bunnies into herself and staging births to gain attention. The press eats it up. Satirical prints show her surrounded by carrots and wide-eyed physicians. It's part freak show, part morality tale, and all tabloid gold. Georgian London doesn't care about decorum, it cares about a good headline. And if a woman pretending to be a rabbit factory gets people talking, then she's as much a celebrity as any duchess caught with her corset down. The coffee house is louder now. Someone's shouting about the latest scandal involving a peer caught frequenting Molly House's secret meeting places for gay men. Homosexuality is still punishable by death, but that doesn't stop the gossip or the hypocrisy. Some of the most powerful men in the country are rumored to frequent these places. The double lives they lead, essential. Their public image must remain pristine, but their private desires leak like bad plumbing. Historians still argue whether these rumors were always rooted in truth, or if they served as tools to discredit rivals. Either way, the fear is real. You notice how the crowd quiets when certain names are mentioned. Some scandals are fun. Others are fatal. Outside, the skies turned a sickly gray, the kind that makes everything look like it's been dipped in old tea. You pause at a street vendor selling pamphlets hot off the press. One headline reads, "Actress accused of bewitching prince witchcraft or wiles?" Another, "Clergyman's secret child found in barn." You pick one up. The paper's rough. The ink still smudgy. The story? Sensational, possibly slanderous, and completely captivating. You keep reading. Because how can you not? In Georgian London, scandal isn't just entertainment, it's social survival. And you're just getting started. You're walking now through a different sort of salon. Not the echoing marble halls of high society, but a boudoir bathed in candlelight, where the perfume is thick, the silk sheets are always rumpled, and the real power doesn't sit in parliament, but reclines on chaise lounges with painted lips and loaded glances. You're in the world of the Georgian courtesan, and right now Kitty Fisher is queen. She's lounging in a portrait studio, wrapped in satin like it's a military uniform, and the painter Joshua Reynolds himself paints her like he's documenting a goddess, not a glorified mistress. But that's the thing, Kitty isn't just arm candy. She's a brand, an empire, an 18th century influencer with an erotic press strategy and better PR instincts than most prime ministers. Everyone knows she was a kept woman, multiple times, but what made her legendary wasn't who she slept with. It was how she spun it. One day she's seen riding horseback in men's clothes. The next she's dining in public on nothing but strawberries and cream, all while being trailed by rumors of liaisons with dukes, generals, even royalty. She writes love letters and lets them accidentally fall into the hands of pamphleteers. The result? Every scandal becomes a headline, and every headline a little more power in her perfume-scented grasp. The thing people forget is that she was dirt poor to start with, born the daughter of a milliner. The aristocrats she beds had everything handed to them. She had to scheme for it, and scheme she did. When one lover tried to ditch her with little more than a goodbye note, she sent it back embroidered on a handkerchief, and wore it around town. That's not heartbreak, that's a branding campaign. Historians still debate whether Kitty's fame empowered women or simply reinforced male fantasies, but you can't deny it. She knew how to turn desire into dynasty. Kitty wasn't alone. She was part of a constellation of courtesans orbiting London's elite, women with names like Fanny Murray, Sophia Baddeley, and Grace Dalrymple Elliott, names whispered in drawing rooms and scribbled on tavern walls. These women weren't passive mistresses. They maneuvered. Fanny Murray reportedly had more influence in some political circles than half the Whig cabinet, just by knowing the right secrets and the right men to threaten with them. Sophia Baddeley could weep on command and seduce with a glance. Grace Dalrymple, tall and scandalously divorced, ended up entangled in espionage during the French Revolution. These weren't women fallen from grace. They were women who needed grace to begin with. They didn't fall. They climbed, stilettos and all. And it wasn't just their beds that were battlegrounds, it was their wardrobes. In a society where women technically had no power, fashion became their arsenal. Kitty Fisher was once painted wearing a simple muslin dress so sheer it sparked a citywide debate on morality. Within days, fabric sellers couldn't keep muslin in stock. The irony? That same sheer gown was designed to mock aristocratic women who looked down on courtesans. The courtesans fought back with lace and lipstick and the power of being seen. Even the act of walking down the street was a calculated performance, gloves perfectly fitted, cheeks slightly rouged, expressions practiced to suggest mystery without giving away plot. They were actors, directors, and box office all in one, but the backlash was just as theatrical. Moralists penned screeds accusing these women of corrupting Britain's soul. Pamphlets like The Whore's Catechism circulated widely, often illustrated with woodcuts of half-dressed women, luring naive young men into ruination. You had public figures decrying their influence while secretly funding their lifestyles. One famous story tells of a bishop caught smuggling a love letter to a courtesan folded inside a psalm book. Georgian hypocrisy wasn't subtle, it was baroque, layered, and florid like their architecture. And that's the strange paradox. While these women were vilified, they were also celebrated. The same society that branded them sinners couldn't stop watching their every move. This obsession with sex and status wasn't confined to taverns or parlors. It bled into the theater. Audiences didn't just come for the plays. They came to see the actresses who were often as notorious offstage as they were brilliant on it. Susanna Cibber, for instance, was a celebrated tragedian with a personal life that could outdrama any script. Her divorce trial in 1738 was public, messy, and deeply humiliating. Her husband accused her of adultery with composer Theophilus Cibber, whom she later married. The newspapers called it a comic opera in court. She went on to become one of the most respected performers of her generation. Meanwhile, Lavinia Fenton, after playing Polly in The Beggar's Opera, became the mistress and eventually the Duchess of the Duke of Bolton. Love didn't just imitate art. It swallowed it whole. Meanwhile, in the margins of the scandal sheets, a strange tidbit keeps popping up. Georgian love potions. Actual recipes shared among the curious and desperate. One involves powdered beetle shells mixed with honey and a drop of the target's sweat. Another recommends wearing a piece of your lover's hair sewn into your corset during a full moon. Whether anyone actually did these things is unclear. What is clear? The belief that desire could be summoned, shaped, manipulated, that the emotional could be made chemical. Georgian society may have pretended to worship reason, but beneath the wigs and waistcoats, they believed in magic, especially if it promised affection, power, or revenge. You pass by a window and catch your reflection. For a moment, it's not your face you see, it's someone else, powdered and painted, lips slightly parted. The very image of Georgian seduction. You realize just how performative this world was. The right story could elevate you. The wrong one could erase you. And yet, everyone played along. Even the men, though they'd never admit it. That rake in the emerald cravat? He's as carefully curated as any courtesan. His spontaneous sonnet about Lady X's ankles? Drafted and edited by candlelight 4 times over. This is a world addicted to artifice, intoxicated by illusion. Back in the drawing rooms, you overhear a group of society ladies discussing Kitty Fisher's most recent portrait. One says it's vulgar, another calls it divine. A third admits she ordered her own gown in the same shade of seafoam green. They sip their tea and slice their social rivals to ribbons with sugar-dusted smiles. In the Georgian age, scandal doesn't just destroy, it circulates, decorates, intoxicates. And for women like Kitty, it's not a hazard. It's the whole business model. There's a man sprinting down Fleet Street in the rain, and he's not running from debt collectors or duels, he's running to the printer. Under his arm is a stack of pages still wet with ink and scandal, the kind that ruins marriages and elections with the same paragraph. You follow him, splashing through puddles, heart pounding like you're in on the secret, because tonight's edition is going to hit like thunder. It's not just gossip. It's a pamphlet accusing the Duke of Devonshire of funding a brothel near Westminster, and the twist? It names names. Names of women, names of men, and even one unlucky clergyman who apparently didn't know his confessional had a peephole. The publisher barely looks up as the runner arrives. He grabs the sheets, flips through them, and whistles. "This'll sell faster than gin on payday," he mutters, already shouting for his apprentices. The press clatters to life. Ink stains the air like perfume. Outside, boys with lungs like trumpets are handed stacks of these tiny bombs. Hot news, Devonshire's dames. Read the Duke's sins. They scatter into the streets, and just like that, another Georgian sex scandal goes viral 18th century style. Welcome to the pamphlet wars. This isn't journalism. It's weaponized gossip, the love child of tabloid rage and erotic fiction. And in this city, no one reads the truth, they devour the suggestion of it. You grab a copy from a shouting child and squint under a lamplight. The prose is lurid, breathless, dripping with euphemism and barely concealed smut. It speaks of moonlit indiscretions and nocturnal engagements of a moral elasticity. It describes the Duchess's voluptuous ascent to infamy, and implies that a certain bishop enjoyed evening ministrations that required neither scripture nor trousers. There are no sources, no dates. Just innuendo crafted like poetry and printed with enough venom to kill a career. These pamphlets flood the city like gossip plagues. They're sold at markets, tucked into pews, passed hand to hand in taverns. One servant girl you overhear reads them aloud behind the kitchens, performing each scandal like a monologue. Another man collects them religiously, binding them in leather volumes he proudly calls his library of human error. The scandal press didn't just entertain it, influenced elections. Political enemies funded smear campaigns masked as morality tales. One Tory pamphlet claimed a Whig lord kept a stable of exotic male lovers disguised as footmen. A Whig rebuttal accused that Tory of impregnating a dairymaid in Oxford and offering her a bribe in cheese. It sounds ridiculous. It was ridiculous, but it worked. In an age when literacy was rising but fact-checking didn't exist, the most salacious rumor often became public truth. Historians still argue whether this era marked the birth of true investigative journalism or just a golden age of well-written libel. What's clear is that the line between news and narrative was thinner than a debutante's fan. And let's talk about that fan. It's not just for fluttering eyelashes. In Georgian high society, fans were practically a second language. A closed fan touch to the lips meant, "We must speak in private." An open fan slowly drawn across the cheek said, "I admire you." A rapidly fluttered fan, "Follow me." Courting was choreography, and scandal, when it came, often started with the flick of a wrist and the wrong person watching. One famous tale tells of Lady Harriet, who supposedly dropped her fan mid-ball. It landed at the feet of a certain Lord Ming, who bent to pick it up, and legend has it, slipped her a note that led to 3 weeks of secluded country escapades and an unexpected duel. That fan now hangs framed in her great-great-granddaughter's dressing room as both family heirloom and warning. But the most dangerous pamphlets didn't target common aristocrats. They went higher, royalty. Which brings us to a very peculiar piece printed anonymously in 1771. It claimed that Queen Charlotte, wife of George III, had once been engaged in a mutually instructive relationship with her female music tutor. The phrasing was so delicate you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. Their evenings were often spent in exercises not strictly confined to the clavichord. Subtle, yes. Damning, definitely. The palace tried to suppress it, but by the time they moved, the pamphlet was already in its 3rd edition. Copies were found in Bristol, York, and even shipped to the colonies. The author was never found. Some speculate it was a rival court faction. Others suggest it was penned by a jilted maid. But the story never quite died. Whispers trailed, queen-like perfume for decades. That's the thing about Georgian gossip. It stuck like honey on lace. Not all pamphleteers worked from malice. Some were bored. Others saw opportunity. One infamous printer, known only as J.T., ran a series called Knights of the Nobility, an erotic anthology purporting to describe true sexual encounters of the elite. Some stories read like fiction. Others match known personalities just a little too well. There's one about a marquis who allegedly insisted all his lovers reenact scenes from classical mythology before consummation. Another tells of a duchess with a trained monkey that supposedly selected her partners by throwing grapes. Outlandish? Absolutely. But believable enough to sell, and in some cases, inspire real behavior. That's right. Georgian elites sometimes tried to live up to their own press. creating a feedback loop where satire and reality danced until neither could remember who led. Then there's the fringe stuff. Stories so weird they almost had to be true, like the tale of Lord B, who was supposedly obsessed with feet to such a degree that he built a salon in his house, where guests were required to attend barefoot. The room was filled with velvet cushions, warm tiles, and servants with ostrich feathers to dust guests' ankles. It was considered avant-garde. A few whispered it was something more. Either way, the pamphlets dubbed it the foot fetish festival, and London couldn't get enough. Soon, caricatures appeared: lords with giant toes, ladies with foot-shaped hats. Even Parliament joked about keeping one's foot in the door. Scandal didn't just inform the public, it shaped the culture. Once the story broke, even truth bent to accommodate it. At the heart of this frenzy, one rule reigned supreme: deniability. No matter how wild the accusation, if you kept your cool and never admitted guilt, you might just outlive the gossip. Some courtiers even turned scandal into insulation. If they're still talking about the affair, one duchess famously said, then they're not looking into the accounts. For her, public disgrace was a shield, one that made her boring. Crime's invisible. You fold the pamphlet back into your coat pocket and step back into the drizzle. The rain hasn't stopped. It never really does here. You wonder how many lives were wrecked by these anonymous sheets of rumor and ink. How many romances ended before they began? How many rivals silenced not with sword but sentence? And yet, you also see the allure. There's power in the story. To be gossiped about, in a way, is to be known, to be visible. And in a society built on appearances, maybe that's the closest thing to immortality. It's well past midnight now, but you're not heading home, not yet. Something's pulling you toward Piccadilly, where the air tastes like mischief, and the gas lamps cast long theatrical shadows. You hear laughter before you see them, young men in brocade coats, powdered hair askew, cheeks flushed with too much port, and the thrill of impunity. These aren't your average drunkards. These are the aristocrats behaving badly. And not just badly extravagantly, unapologetically, creatively badly. You turn the corner and find yourself face to face with a carriage painted entirely in gold. Leaf, its driver blindfolded, steering by memory and chaos. Inside, the Duke of Queensberry, one of London's most infamous libertines, lounging like a Roman emperor in silk robes, feeding grapes to a naked violinist. This is not exaggeration, it's Tuesday. Queensberry, nicknamed Old Q, was legendary for turning debauchery into high art. He once threw a party where guests were required to dress as their favorite sin. Gluttony showed up in a bacon corset. Lust wore nothing but pearls. Even in a city addicted to scandal, he was something else. His townhouse was rumored to have hidden rooms, with revolving walls and ceilings painted with scenes so erotic, they made the Kama Sutra look like a church bulletin. But it wasn't just the decor, it was the intent. Everything Queensberry did screamed defiance. The rules didn't apply to him, not because he was above them, but because he made better ones. You watch as his entourage parades into a private club that technically doesn't exist. No sign, no invitation, just a series of knocks on an oak door that opens onto velvet chaos. Inside, you catch glimpses of masquerade masks, powdered wigs, feathers, and the occasional strategically placed fan. The champagne flows like gossip, and somewhere, someone is performing a mock trial for crimes of restraint. A judge in robes condemns a duchess for monogamy. She pretends to faint. The crowd cheers. You're not just witnessing a party. You're watching the elite flirt with anarchy. And then there's the story of Lady Caroline Stanhope, Countess of Harrington, who once showed up to a masquerade ball dressed entirely as a shepherdess, except the dress was translucent. The crook was gold, and she had actual lambs following her. She called it pastoral satire. Everyone else called it a brazen excuse to show off her legs. But that was the game. The nobility understood that in a society obsessed with etiquette, The best way to shock was to pretend you didn't know any better. Lady Caroline also famously hosted garden parties, where guests were encouraged to write erotic poetry using only fruit metaphors. One surviving stanza reads, "Your lips like cherries do deceive, so ripe yet not for me to thieve." A bit clumsy, sure, but the point wasn't the verse. It was the thrill, the audacity. Georgian aristocrats didn't just indulge, they performed their vices like opera. And of course, they made sure to invite the right people. Not just lovers and friends, but writers, painters, even satirists. Better to have them inside the party, with a drink in hand than outside with a pen and a grudge. This is how Richard Brinsley Sheridan, famed playwright and professional gossip magnate, ended up embedded in nearly every scandalous circle in town. He once challenged a man to a duel for besmirching his future wife's honor, then wrote a play about it. He knew the secret. If you can't avoid being talked about, script the dialogue yourself. Still, beneath the laughter and libertine flair, something more calculated simmers. These scandals aren't accidental, they're curated. Every affair, every insult, every broken engagement carries a ripple of intent. Want to torpedo your political opponent? Spread rumors that he's spending too much time with the footman. Need to distract from your bankrupt estate? Announce a scandalous affair and let the press chase that tale instead. It's the long con of public indecency. One lord allegedly faked a love triangle between himself, his cousin, and an Italian opera singer just to keep creditors at bay. It worked. The press lost their minds. His debts were forgotten, at least until the opera singer disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and her diary was found describing nights spent chained to decadence. And yes, that's a real quote. Diaries, by the way, are another deliciously treacherous source of Georgian sex scandal. The elite were obsessed with writing things down. Love letters, confessions, erotic dreams, they documented everything. Like they knew future historians would need juicy content, and they weren't shy. One duchess described her lover's mustache as a divine tickler of forbidden sanctuaries. Another lord compared his mistress's laugh to a scandal uncoiling. Sometimes these diaries were kept secret. Sometimes they were found by servants and sold. And occasionally, they were leaked on purpose. Because even then, people understood the PR power of a well-timed expose. Better they read my version, one viscount is said to have declared, than the washerwoman's. By now, your feet hurt, and your brain feels glazed with powdered sugar and sin. But the night isn't over. A sudden flash of lightning illuminates a row of townhouses where more shadows play behind curtains than on the street. You pause at one, where the silhouette of a woman is visible in a third-floor window. She's laughing, glass in hand, dancing alone to music you can't hear. A man joins her. They kiss. It lasts. You wonder who she is. A courtesan? A duchess? A bored wife reclaiming a moment of her own? It doesn't matter. What matters is that the world outside will speculate about that kiss for weeks. And she knows. That's the power of scandal in this city. It makes everyone visible. And just when you think nothing else can surprise you, someone whispers the name of Lord Montague. Ah, Montague, the man who allegedly tried to organize a scandal Olympics. Among his peers, categories included most public indiscretion, best disguise during an affair, and most creative alibi. The winner got a hand-carved ivory goblet filled with brandy and the envy of London's inner circle. Was it real? Who knows? But it was printed in a pamphlet, reprinted in a satirical magazine, and eventually adapted into a comic opera. So real. Enough to matter. This was the essence of the Georgian elite. Misbehave flamboyantly enough, and you become an immortal. Get caught, but make it fashionable. Fall from grace, but land in velvet. Historians still argue whether this generation of aristocrats was truly libertine or simply performative. whether they pushed boundaries out of conviction or boredom. But you can't deny their legacy. The scandals they spawned didn't just fill columns, they built careers, ended lineages, and reshaped the very idea of what it meant to be noble. You wander back toward your rented room as the city sighs. Beneath the rain. Somewhere behind you, laughter still echoes through the fog. You realize you've witnessed more in one evening than most people confess in a lifetime. And yet, there's a strange calm. Scandal in Georgian London isn't chaos, it's ritual. And tonight, you've become part of it. The candles flicker. Low now, not from lack of wax, but from the weight of so many whispered sins pressed into the walls. You've made it into the drawing rooms, the salons, the parlors, the perfumed arenas where high society's women perform subtler scandals than anything the streets can offer. You expect idle gossip over tea and embroidery, but what you find is a battlefield won, stitched in silk, loaded with glances, and paved with secrets. These are the ladies of Georgian London, and behind the lace and laughter lies a web of flirtation, manipulation, and sabotage so intricate it makes Parliament look like amateur hour. You sit near the edge of a settee, eavesdropping on a conversation between Lady F and her visiting cousin. On the surface, it's about gowns and music. Beneath, a coded critique of a rival's latest affair. Her sapphire necklace, my dear one would almost think it a gift from Lord B, considering how often she drops it during conversation. The cousin laughs, delicate and dangerous. In this room, reputations can unravel from a single misplaced compliment. You notice how every movement is studied, rehearsed. A tilt of the chin, a fan turned just so, a pause before laughter. These women aren't ornamental, they're tacticians. And they've had to be. Georgian society gave them titles and tiaras, but little else in the way of control. So they turned flirtation into a language and scandal into currency. When they couldn't inherit estates, they inherited influence. Seduction became strategy. And sometimes it worked better than law. The infamous Lady Melbourne, yes, the one whose son became prime minister, was known to host salons where guests drank tea one moment and plotted political maneuvers the next. She advised politicians, brokered alliances, and all the while smiled as though nothing she said mattered. Historians still argue whether she truly pulled strings behind the scenes, or simply knew how to make men believe she did. But either way, the drawing room was her court, and her power lived in innuendo. Take the curious case of Lady Mary Coke. She once spent a season determined to outshine her rival by seducing the Prince of Wales, not out of love, but for status. Her letters, carefully preserved, reveal a woman dissecting every look, every compliment, like a scientist analyzing chemicals. She cataloged his responses. He seemed affected by the rose I wore. He inquired twice after my dog. And when the prince ultimately married another, Lady Mary published a private journal filled with insinuations, so pointed that readers swore they could smell the scandal through the paper. She played the long game, and she wasn't the only one. These women wielded rumor like fencing foils. Sharp, glittering, and always just short of deadly. But sometimes, things slipped beyond control. The story of Lady Seymour O. You'll like this one. A respected hostess and known patron of the arts, she was caught in what the press delicately called a triangular correspondence with her husband's valet and a young Italian painter. Letters were discovered hidden inside a false-bottomed box of snuff. The scandal exploded. Caricatures showed her straddling a palette while two mustachioed suitors fought with paintbrushes. She fled to Bath under the guise of needing waters for her nerves, but returned 6 months later to a society that had already forgiven her in exchange for more gossip. Why? Because her parties were too good to cancel. That's Georgian forgiveness. It's never moral. It's conditional. As long as you keep hosting, no one cares who you're sleeping with. And if the ladies were strategic, the widows were downright lethal. A widow in Georgian London wasn't a tragic figure. She was a wild card. freed from the legal bondage of marriage, yet still cloaked in the respectability of mourning clothes. She could maneuver in ways younger debutantes only dreamed of. Some wore their widow's weeds like armor, others like lingerie. Lady Henrietta Cavendish, famously widowed at 26, was said to have entertained lovers strictly between the hours of morning and supper. Her black silk gowns became her signature. She'd arrive at operas fashionably late, face veiled, perfume unmistakable, always flanked by admirers. One particularly bold caricature depicted her seated atop a gravestone inscribed, "Here lies my husband," winking at the viewer while raising a glass of champagne. And you mustn't think this seduction stayed contained to men. Georgian women developed intense emotional, and yes, possibly romantic connections with one another. Historians still debate whether these relationships were platonic or part of a larger, unspoken spectrum of desire that couldn't be named in the language of the time. One such pair, Lady Anne and Miss E, whose letters to one another spanned decades, used coded phrases like midnight understandings and shared warmth through woolen nights. Nothing explicitly sexual survives, but the intimacy is unmistakable. And perhaps that's the point. The vagueness itself is the message. These women lived in a world where scandal could mean social death, but only if it could be proven. So they left just enough ambiguity to keep tongues wagging and reputations intact. And let's not forget the servants. In the finely tuned theater of Georgian domesticity, they were the stagehands, the ones who saw the costume changes, the missed cues, the whispered cues in candlelit corridors. And sometimes they wrote it down, or sold it, or whispered it to the printer's assistant, who shared it with his cousin who wrote for the Gentlewoman's Intelligencer. A maid once exposed her employer's affair by sending an anonymous letter sealed with her mistress's perfume. Another footman, sacked for insolence, got his revenge by describing in print how the lady of the house hosted chess lessons in her boudoir involving neither chessboard nor chaperone. In this society, every doorknob turned became a plot point, but even within the storm of whispers and maneuverings, there was genuine vulnerability. That's the part that catches you off guard. In one diary, a baroness describes feeling more seen in scandal than in marriage. She writes, "They watched me when I erred, but never when I wept." That sentence lingers with you, because behind every performance was a human pulse aching for affection, for freedom, for someone to hear the story behind the satire. These women didn't just navigate scandal, they survived it. They leveraged it. They danced with it in slippers. Lined with steel dot, you rise from the drawing room, feeling dizzy with perfume and paradox. The fire crackles in the hearth, and a servant begins collecting empty glasses. Somewhere in the city, another rumor is being born. And in this world, that's more enduring than diamonds. You step out from the dim drawing room haze into the brittle morning air, and instantly, the gossip hits you harder than the cold. It wafts through the city like a perfume you didn't consent to wear, 1 part lavender, 2 parts slander. You're starting to see the rhythm of this place, this London. That doesn't sleep but simmers, where your reputation is a balancing act on a powder-dusted razor blade. It's not about what you do, it's about what people say you've done. And how many people are repeating it over weak tea and boiled beef. Here, gossip isn't small talk, it's social currency. The value of your name goes up or down depending on how provocatively it was whispered last night, and who is pretending not to listen. You pass a couple of footmen lingering at a carriage post, one smirking as he murmurs something that makes the other nearly choke on laughter. You catch only the words Lady B's chamber pot and Lord C's medal, and your brain doesn't want to connect the dots, but it does anyway. The details are almost irrelevant. It's the pattern that matters. In Georgian London, being boring is worse than being bad. Sin can be forgiven. Forgettability cannot. You duck into a narrow bookshop that smells of leather and damp ambition. The owner, an old man with ink-stained fingers, is asleep behind the counter, snoring into a pile of improving literature. But near the back, tucked discreetly behind a row of dusty volumes on Roman law, is the good stuff. Memoirs, confessions, letters of a lady. These are the unofficial biographies of Georgian scandal, full of anecdotes. So detailed, they must have been paid for. You flip through one. A certain viscountess recounts how she discovered her husband's mistress not by accident, but by design. She had sent the woman to him herself as a loyalty test. He failed, of course, she writes, but at least now I knew his tastes. She follows that line with a suggestion that she began dressing to match. Revenge, apparently, is best served corseted, and revenge is very much in fashion. One of the quirkiest scandals involves a duel not over land or honor, but over ballroom gossip. Two ladies' cousins accused each other of spreading a rumor that one's poodle had been dyed pink as a flirtation tactic. The implication was not about the dog, but about the lady's virtue. The resulting quarrel escalated into a public scene. At Vauxhall Gardens, complete with parasol jabbing and a full-pitch screaming match involving accusations of false pregnancies, fake teeth, and counterfeit pearls. Within days, a satirical pamphlet titled The Poodle Affair was being sold near Charing Cross. It included imaginary letters between the cousins, and even a poem lamenting the poodle's dishonorable dye. The poem rhymed fuchsia with crucia, and it still sold out its first printing. At the heart of this madness is a cultural truth too awkward to admit outright. Gossip is survival, especially for women, but really for everyone who isn't at the top of the pyramid. If you can't control land, votes, or armies, you can control narrative. Whisper enough about someone, and you're no longer beneath them, you're next to them, maybe above them, if only for a moment. Gossip equalizes, it knocks down dukes and elevates seamstresses. It's the closest thing Georgian society has to justice, and yes, it's messy. That's the point. It allows secrets to do what laws won't: destabilize, provoke, rearrange the social furniture. You walk past a tailor shop where two apprentices are giggling over an open letter supposedly penned by an anonymous lady of the court. To the gentleman whose hand lingered too long on my petticoat hem, it begins. It's outrage disguised as poetry, or perhaps desire camouflaged as complaint. Either way, it's being read aloud like scripture. The boys try to read it with mock seriousness, but the blushes give them away. It's not just scandal, they're learning the social code. These letters, these stories, they teach you who's powerful, who's vulnerable, and how dangerously thin that line can be. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the case of Elizabeth Chudley. You'll love her. Maid of honor, social lightning. Rod in walking contradiction. She lived a life so scandalous it eventually became legal precedent. She married secretly, denied it publicly, then married someone else illegally, while still claiming to be a virgin. When it all came crashing down in court, the transcripts read like an erotic opera. Lies, titles, hidden documents, family. Betrayals. She was found guilty of bigamy and technically should have lost everything. Instead, she became the Duchess of Kingston. She moved to France. She hosted glittering salons. The scandal made her famous, and then her fame made the scandal unimportant. Historians still argue whether she was villain or victim, manipulator or manipulated. What's certain is that she understood the stakes and played them better than most. At a small print shop, you overhear two young women haggling over the last copy of The Secret Life of Lord L. The older one snatches it first, waving a coin as if in triumph. The younger mutters, "I heard he prefers redheads." The owner shrugs, "I heard he prefers twins." They all laugh, and just like that, you realize that gossip doesn't just ruin, it entertains. It's theater. It gives meaning to idle hours, animates otherwise dreary lives, and it's not always cruel. Sometimes it's absurd, joyful, utterly surreal. Like the story of a duchess who refused to leave her bed for 3 months because she believed her rival had cursed her petticoats. Or the footman who claimed his master's mistress was actually his aunt until someone pointed out the ages didn't match, and he responded, "She lies about everything. Why not her birth year?" But even as you laugh, you start to notice the consequences, the ruined engagements, the abrupt disappearances, the young girls shipped off to relatives in the country, never to be mentioned again, the nobleman who suddenly fell ill right after a letter surfaced, accusing him of seducing a minor actress and offering her a pension in exchange for silence. That letter never made it to court, but the actress vanished. No one ever followed up. Not every story ends in poems and parodies. Some end in silence. Still, the machine grinds on. Gossip is its own engine, self-fueling, tireless. It feeds on discomfort, on scandal, but also on curiosity. You walk past a street preacher yelling about sin and damnation. Next to him, a pamphlet seller hawks Confessions of a Bishop's Niece. Guess which one has a longer line. And as the sun finally breaks through the clouds, you find yourself at a breakfast table in a boarding house where 3 ladies are reading different scandal sheets, passing them like salt and sugar. She wore. What? He did that? No, it's morning routine now. Forget porridge. This is sustenance, fuel, the lifeblood of Georgian civility disguised as cruelty. And maybe you're not immune either. Because when one of the ladies asks if you've heard about the Marquis and the singer with the tattooed ankle, you lean in just a little, just to listen. Just for context, the courtroom is packed so tightly the wallpaper seems to sweat. It smells like perfume, damp wigs, and the breathless thrill of shared shame. You slip in through a side door and squeeze between a viscount and a bookseller's apprentice, all jostling for space not just to sit, but to say, "I was there. I saw it." This isn't a murder trial. It's something far juicier. Tonight's entertainment? The Trial of Lady Worsley, a real-life erotic novel with footnotes, and London can't get enough. At the front of the room stands a woman whose crimson gown dares the gallery to blink first. Her expression is calm, almost amused as the prosecutor reads aloud a list of her alleged lovers. 19, possibly more. The number echoes like a sermon. Her husband, Sir Richard Worsley, stands beside her, pale with a righteousness that doesn't quite cover the cracks. You watch the jury try to keep their faces still. They fail. Everyone knows this isn't about justice. It's about spectacle. The details being reed-soaked bedsheets, secret doors, naked baths interrupted by curious houseguests, are theater in powdered form. The city hasn't been this entertained since the last royal christening, only now the christenings. Being done with gossip and ink, the case is absurd on paper. Sir Richard is suing George Bissett, one of Lady Worsley's many lovers, for criminal conversation, a legal euphemism for adultery that, by this point, has become its own genre of entertainment. He wants £20,000 in damages, which everyone knows is less about injury and more about ego. But Lady Worsley has come prepared. Her defense is not denial, it's escalation. Her lawyers present evidence that Sir Richard knew about her affairs, even facilitated them. They produce witnesses who claim he positioned men to see her bathing through keyholes. One servant describes how Sir Richard once whispered, "Enjoy the view," before guiding a guest toward her dressing room. The gallery gasps then, laughs. This trial has flipped. Sir Richard is no longer a betrayed husband. He's a perverse stage manager. And Lady Worsley? She's suddenly not the fallen woman, but the wronged one. The clever one. The star of a scandal rewritten in real time. Historians still argue whether she orchestrated the entire thing or simply adapted faster than anyone expected. What's undeniable is how the court of public opinion pivoted. Broadsheets printed illustrations of her, arms crossed, eyes defiant. Her lover, Bissett, became an afterthought. The real story was her. Women whispered about her with half admiration, half fear. Men debated whether she was libertine or liberator. And behind it all, printers counted their profits because this was gold. The transcripts were reprinted and sold for years. Copies of her portrait tripled in value. Even her discarded gloves became collector's items. You look around the courtroom and realize this isn't law, it's cabaret in wigs and waistcoats. And yet, the trial's outcome is oddly anticlimactic. Sir Richard is awarded a single shilling in damages, an insult masquerading as judgment. But the real damage has been done to his pride, and the real victory is hers. She walks out of court like a queen without a crown, but with something much rarer, narrative control. In a city where women are usually spoken about, she has spoken for herself. And it's not just her reputation that survives, it expands. She becomes a symbol of rebellion, scandal, and seductive audacity. Years later, she writes her memoirs. And while some say they're self-serving, everyone agrees they're unforgettable. But what makes the Worsley case truly electric isn't just the sex, it's the legal drama of it. The very fact that you can sue over adultery turns private shame into public theater. And the public, bless them, eats it with a spoon. Crim, con. Cases become so popular, they're staged as plays. Actual actors reenact the court transcripts on makeshift stages in taverns and gardens. One production advertises itself as an evening of legal lasciviousness and features a musical number where the mistress sings, "I'll testify with pleasure." You wonder how many of the jurors from the real case ended up in the audience. Other cases follow. A marquis sues his wife's fencing instructor. A duchess accuses her husband's secretary of embezzling affections. One particularly farcical trial involves a baronet who claims his wife fell in love with a French pastry chef. The judge tries not to laugh when the chef admits he wooed her with cream puffs and flute solos. The gallery doesn't even try. The line between courtroom and comedy club vanishes. In these moments, Georgian society reveals its true self, not a bastion of morality, but a carnival of performance. Every trial is an audition for notoriety, and every verdict a review. You leave the courthouse buzzing. The streets outside are already full of pamphlets summarizing the trial. Some take Lady Worsley's side, others vilify her, but all agree on one thing: she has become a character, a figure larger than her life. And you realize that's the real legacy of these scandals. They make myths out of mortals. People remember the story, not the truth. And sometimes, if you're clever, you can make the story work for you. On your way back through the Strand, a group of theater apprentices are arguing about which scandal should be adapted next. "Lady Worsley's done," one says. "We need fresh blood. What about Lady Grosvenor?" "Too tragic," another replies. "People like comedy." "Then what about Lord Sandwich and the violinist?" "Old news." You smile because you realize they're not really arguing about history. They're debating casting, genre, tone. In this world, everyone's a playwright, and every affair is a potential act one. Even you, maybe. You find yourself imagining how your own story might be told, who would narrate it, what details they'd exaggerate, which glance or phrase would be spun into a scandal. And that's when it hits you. Georgian gossip isn't just about other people. It's about the fear of becoming invisible. About doing something, anything, that makes someone write your name down, even if they spell it wrong. You pass a bookseller, displaying a new release titled Asterisk, The Trials and Transgressions of the Ton. Asterisk. Cover features a cartoon of a blushing baroness hiding behind a fan, one stocking slightly askew. It's crass, it's ridiculous, and it's completely sold out. Another edition is already being printed. You watch a young maid purchase a dog-eared copy from a street vendor, then tuck it into her apron with a conspiratorial grin. Read it in bed tonight, maybe by candlelight, maybe under a blanket, may be aloud to someone who shouldn't be listening. And the cycle continues. By the time you reach your lodgings, the city has gone quiet, but not still. Behind closed doors, people are whispering. Some are writing. A few are undressing slowly, wondering whether tomorrow's scandal will be theirs. And as you blow out the candle, you realize you'll never hear the word trial the same way again. In Georgian London, justice isn't blind, it's peeking through the keyhole. There's a room in a dusty Mayfair townhouse where the air smells like ink, brandy, and bad decisions written in perfect iambic pentameter. You step into it like a trespasser, only to realize you're among the most dangerous minds of Georgian London, not philosophers, not politicians, but poets. Romantic, unhinged, and oozing self-pity, these are the men of letters, and they are very much men of lust. Lord Byron, George Gordon himself, leans against the mantelpiece, shirt slightly open, a smirk that could undo corsets from 20 paces. He's reciting a poem about love, death, and betrayal, while two society wives try not to swoon, and a valet pours wine like it's anesthesia. You watch as he scribbles a line on a napkin, then kisses it for flair. You feel that. He mutters before tossing it in the fire. He's drunk, yes, but also painfully aware of his own myth. Byron is Georgian gossip's patron saint, not just for the scandal he caused, but for the scandal he crafted. He made his life the plot, and poetry the PR. His rumored affairs include everyone from actresses to choir boys, chambermaids to fellow poets. There's even a dog involved somewhere, though hopefully not like that. The stories are relentless. One lover claimed he wrote her a sonnet on her thigh. Another said he read Ovid aloud during foreplay. His own half-sister was rumored to be one of his many muses, and the rumor stuck because Byron never quite denied it. Historians still argue whether the incest was real or just poetic branding, but either way, it kept people talking. And that's the game. Byron knew the value of being unignorable. When his publisher warned that one of his works might be considered too revealing, Byron reportedly said, "Good, let them blush. It proves they're reading." You can almost hear the quills scratching as other writers tried to keep up. But Byron wasn't the only one weaponizing words. The literary salons of London were filled with authors who understood that seduction and syntax were two sides of the same blade. Richard Sheridan, remember him? Still holding court with his wine-stained wit and well-worn cravat, dropping double entendres like they're hors d'oeuvres. He once said that a successful play needed three things: wit, wine, and women who know how to listen without agreeing. He was joking, probably, but not entirely. He knew that theater was the only place where scandal could be staged with applause. His plays often mirrored his life, messy, passionate, and full of characters that talk too much and touch even more. There's a particular genre thriving in this period, known as the amatory novel, early erotica cloaked in moral caution. Authors like Eliza Haywood churned out titles like Love in Excess and Phantomina, in which women scheme, disguise themselves, seduce men, and often outmaneuver them. The critics called them trash. The readers called them truth. These books flew off shelves and under beds. They weren't just read, they were inhaled, usually in secret. One maid was caught with a copy of The British Recluse, hidden in her corset. She claimed it was for moral education. Her mistress confiscated it and allegedly finished reading it herself. Georgian literature, in this sense, was both rebellion and confession. It gave people language for what they couldn't say aloud, and maybe for what they'd already done. Then, in walks Thomas Gray, melancholy, withdrawn, more ghost than man. But when he writes about longing, the page practically sweats. His elegy, written in a country churchyard, is read in schools now, but back then, it whispered of quiet passions, of lives unlived and urges unspoken. There's always a debate with Gray. Was he hiding his sexuality in metaphor, or simply too gentle for the brutish courtships of his peers? His letters to male friends pulse with tenderness. He writes, "You are always present in my mind, in my heart, and I am a better man when I think of you." Platonic? Possibly. Erotic? Possibly. But in a society where men weren't allowed to love each other openly, ambiguity was both shield and knife. One lesser-known poet, Christopher Smart, wrote verses while imprisoned for religious mania. Though some whisper the real reason was his indiscretions with certain noble patrons. His poem, Jubilata Agno, includes a long ode to his cat, Geoffrey, which sounds innocent until you read it twice. Some think he was just mad. Others think he was silenced for knowing too much about too many titled bedsheets. Either way, his words survive. His scandal, whatever its truth, gave him a kind of immortality. Even the critics weren't safe. Samuel Johnson, intellectual juggernaut and dictionary maker, was often followed by rumors about his friendship with his former servant, a young man named Francis Barber. Johnson left him a generous inheritance. They lived together for years. They shared meals, letters, and the occasional suspicious weekend away. Johnson was known to be deeply affectionate in his correspondence, so much so that later biographers had to decide what to keep and what to sanitize. One editor referred to Barber as a curious fixture in the good doctor's affections. The phrasing practically winks. And then there's the unpublished stuff, the poetry people read in private, pass hand to hand, never speak of aloud. Verses scrawled on tavern walls or stitched into garters. A popular ballad in 1790 describes a nobleman's heaving passion unbuttoned by verse. Another, likely written by a scorned lover, calls her former paramour a man of letters, but not of honesty. These were the true voices of the time, anonymous and biting. Historians call it ephemeral literature, but it often outlived its polished counterparts. You find one such scrap tucked into a book at a market stall. It reads, "He wrote me promises in ink, but kissed me in invisible type." You don't know who wrote it, but you can feel exactly who they meant. The irony, of course, is that these poets, so eloquent in private, were often clumsy in real life. Byron's love letters alternated between passionate and pathetic. One began, "I dreamt of you on a Tuesday," which must mean something. Another ended with, "If you do not reply, I shall assume your silence is filled with love." It wasn't. The recipient married someone else, but maybe that's what makes it all so relatable. The poets, for all their talent, were just people, trying to articulate the unsayable. Desire, rejection, longing, power. And they did it with more flair, more metaphor, more mess than anyone else. Georgian London didn't just write about sex. It rewrote it daily, line by line, rhyme by filthy rhyme dot as the evening falls. You picture Byron, shirt half undone, composing a verse about moonlight and betrayal while being scandalized in the same breath by the very audience who can't stop quoting him. And you realize something. In this world, words aren't just entertainment. They're armor. They're seduction. They're ammunition. And sometimes, they're the only thing left standing after the affair is over. It starts with the rattle of a key in a lock and the hushed, hurried steps of a maid who's seen too much and been paid too little to forget it. You follow her through the back corridors of a Belgravia townhouse, where gilt mirrors reflect things no one dares say aloud, and the wallpaper listens harder than the guests. These aren't drawing rooms anymore. They're backstage dressing areas for the grand farce of respectability. And the real actors? The servants, invisible in life, omnipresent in memory. Every scandal you've heard, every affair whispered over coffee started here, between the pressed linens and cooling pots of tea, where valets and maids watched, listened, and sometimes recorded everything with a precision historians still envy. The Georgian servant was a voyeur by profession, a reluctant confidant, and occasionally a well-compensated informant. In the kitchens, secrets are salted like pork. A housemaid hums the tune she heard Lady Armitage sing while draped over her violin instructor. A footman mimics the staggered walk of the Earl of P after too much midnight brandy, which is code for a different kind of indulgence altogether. You lean in, and the cook, without looking up from her pies, says flatly, "He leaves the money under the candlestick. Always a crown, never more." And just like that, another lord's facciata crumbles in the flowery warmth of the staff quarters. You'd think the upstairs people would know better, but no. They forget who irons their handkerchiefs, who polishes their shoes, who scrubs lipstick off the inside collar of their waistcoats. Georgian servants don't need to snoop. They just need to exist. And when the servants talk, the city listens. That's how half the scandal sheets get their leads, not from reporters, but from dismissed valets with a grudge or bored maids paid by printers hungry for drama. One pamphlet in 1774, Whispers from the Gallery, details the entire affair. Of a duchess and her cousin's tutor, based solely on kitchen gossip and a misplaced diary page. It was dismissed by the nobility as servants' lies, until the tutor fled to France and the duchess conveniently developed a mysterious illness, known as continental fatigue. Historians still argue whether the story was embellished, but the timeline doesn't lie. The staff may not have been invited to the masquerades, but they knew what happened when the masks came off. And then there's Mary. No last name. Never needed one. She was a lady's maid for over 30 years, worked for 3 households, and was the undisputed queen of servant gossip. She claimed to have been present, literally in the room for the beginning or end of at least 7 affairs, including the infamous tryst between Lord Camden and the Italian soprano who taught his daughter scales. Mary never published a word. Herself, she didn't have to. She whispered into ears that mattered, and somehow, her stories always appeared in pamphlets weeks later, reworded but unmistakable. Her power wasn't what she saw, it was how many people believed she had seen it. She once told a houseguest, "I know when someone lies by how fast they button their cuffs. You don't know whether that's true, but you button yours a little slower just in case." The intimacy of the servant's gaze was unmatched. A valet knew not just what time a gentleman came home, but how flushed he looked doing it. A maid didn't need to read love letters, she laundered the bedsheets. One scullery boy was reportedly able to recite entire conversations between a baroness and her lover by ear, mimicking their sighs and all. When the baroness found out, she tried to have him dismissed, but he stayed. Because he knew things. He was suddenly paid more, fed better, and given the good boots. In Georgian society, knowledge wasn't just power, it was protection. Especially when it came from below stairs. And the letters. Oh, the letters. Servants were often the couriers of love, deceit, and apologies. They carried folded papers sealed with wax and scented with lavender, never opening them, of course, but always aware. Some learned to decipher handwriting by candlelight. Others didn't need to read. They could tell everything from a letter's weight, its frequency, the urgency in a lady's voice when she whispered, "Be discreet." Some valets were so entrenched in their master's affairs they became strategists. One was known to suggest alternate rendezvous locations to throw off suspicion, he claimed. Another helped forge a fake engagement ring to fool a jealous rival. The reward? Lifelong employment and the occasional hush money bonus in guineas. Not bad for a man who started out dusting boot heels, but with all this knowledge came danger. One unfortunate maid, Hannah Rue, was caught between 2 lords who both believed she was loyal only to them. She wasn't. She told the truth to whoever tipped better. When the affair unraveled, both men tried to ruin her, accusing her of theft, disloyalty, even witchcraft. She narrowly escaped jail and fled to Bristol, where she sold her story to a local printer. The pamphlet, titled "The Maid Who Knew Too Much," became a bestseller. She moved to Bath and opened a boarding house. Some say she died rich. Others claim she vanished. But her story lived on, quoted, embellished, fictionalized in 3 plays and a song. And here's the twist no one wants to admit. Many of these scandals wouldn't exist without the servants. They were the architects of memory, the editors of behavior, the ones who decided which story survived and which went to the grave. Georgian nobles may have held the titles, but the real historians wore aprons. You begin to understand why so many memoirs of the era include odd details, strange times of day, references to specific candles, quotes no guest should have heard. That's because they weren't written for posterity. They were written in defense. This is what really happened, they whisper, because I know the servants will say otherwise. One of the most chilling scandals involved a housemaid who testified in a criminal conversation case, not against the lover, but against her own mistress. Her statement detailed secret signals, coded notes, and a clever use of flower arrangements to communicate meeting times. She ended her testimony with the sentence, "She told me, 'My husband sees nothing, but you see everything.'" The line was reprinted across London. Within weeks, "You see everything" became a catchphrase, scribbled on tavern walls, embroidered into mocking handkerchiefs, even sung by drunk students at Cambridge. So, the next time you picture Georgian scandal, don't think only of corsets and powdered wigs. Think of the candle being snuffed out by a maid who heard too much. Think of the valet standing silent in the hallway, notebook in his mind. Think of the whisper behind the curtain. Because in a city built on secrets, the servants didn't just clean up the mess. Sometimes they made sure there was one worth cleaning. There's a tunnel under the Chiltern Hills where candles burn low. Wine flows too freely, and powdered gentlemen in velvet cloaks raise their glasses not to God or king, but to something far older, darker, and more decadent. You've found your way to Medmenham Abbey, home of the notorious Hellfire Club. And if it feels like you've stepped into a fever dream painted by a drunk libertine, that's because you have. It's the mid-1700s, and the elite's newest pastime is blasphemy served the side of seduction. Here, in a building once blessed for monks, the gentry now gather in masks and silk stockings to toast Satan, recite naughty Latin, and sample pleasures they don't dare name in daylight. The invitation? Exclusive. The mood? Somewhere between cabaret and cult. And the guest list? Well, it includes half the House of Lords. Welcome to the dark underbelly of Georgian scandal, ritualized, erotic, and dripping with irony. You watch as a procession begins, candles held in dripping fists, everyone cloaked in red or black, faces hidden behind grinning masks shaped like beasts, demons, or worse, philosophers. At the center, a figure known only as the abbot raises his glass and declares, "Do what thou wilt," a phrase that sounds like theology if you're drunk enough. Some say the abbot is Sir Francis Dashwood himself, the founder of this pleasure cult, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, and walking contradiction. In Parliament by day, scandal architect by night. He's rumored to have decorated the abbey with erotic frescoes so explicit that visitors could only describe them through metaphor. "Imagine a Roman orgy," one whispered, "but with better lighting." Historians still argue whether Dashwood's rituals were genuine satanic homage or elaborate satire, but the results are the same: orgies, oaths, and enough vice to fill a book banned in 5 countries. The Hellfire Club wasn't just about sex, it was about control, secrecy, and the thrill of doing what society forbade. Members were often men with everything titles, estates, parliamentary influence, but what they craved was danger without consequence. So they built their own playground. The abbey's underground chambers were reportedly filled with aphrodisiacs, mirrors, and silks imported from the East. One hallway was said to contain a series of rooms, each themed after one of the 7 deadly sins. A member could choose his vice like ordering from a menu. There are tales of members entering with one companion and leaving with 3 or none, or someone else's entirely. The rules were simple: no names, no judgments, no apologies. And once a month, they staged mock religious ceremonies that parodied communion. replacing wine with rum and wafers with slices of roasted pheasant or occasionally less a savory fare. The sacrilege was deliberate. The titillation was intellectual, and they weren't alone. Similar clubs cropped up across the country. The Devan Club, the Monks of Medmenham, the Beggar's Benison in Scotland, each offering its own blend of ritualized hedonism. The Beggar's Benison, for instance, held ceremonies where members presented their virility for group inspection and occasionally made toasts with vessels carved from human bone. It sounds grotesque, but remember, these were men raised in a world that prized discretion but secretly longed for spectacle. They had to pretend to virtue in Parliament, but in the darkness of their clubs, they became avatars of appetite. And it wasn't just men. Rumors swirled about women often. Actresses, courtesans, or very daring ladies of the court who attended in disguise. One infamous tale tells of a duchess who dressed as a monk and participated in a mock wedding ceremony involving a goat, a satin sash, and an oath never to speak of love without laughter. The goat, it said, wore bells. Another story describes a well-known opera singer emerging from a hidden chamber wearing only a crown of laurel leaves and a smirk. Whether these stories are true is almost irrelevant. What matters is that people believed them. The allure of the Hellfire Club was always half reality, half myth, carefully cultivated by those who understood that scandal, when mixed with secrecy, is the most addictive drug of all. You stumble across an old copy of a diary written by a brother of the flame, preserved by accident in a Norfolk attic. The entries are equal parts confession and performance. One describes a ceremony where members toasted to the god Priapus and competed in a game called the Trial of Temptation, in which blindfolded guests had to identify lovers by touch alone. Another recounts the initiation of a young marquis who, according to the writer, left blushing but returned hungry. The details are vague, but the tone is unmistakable. Pride, danger, and a deep sense of belonging to something forbidden. The Hellfire Club wasn't just a party, it was a brotherhood built on shared defiance. And defiance, in this case, extended to religion itself. The clubs didn't just poke fun at the church, they inverted it. They turned sermons into stripteases, and sacred texts into innuendo. One satirical prayer circulating among the members read, "Lead us into temptation, deliver us unto pleasure, and forgive us for we do not repent." It was sacrilege dressed in poetry. Georgian England, for all its pretense of piety, loved nothing more than watching the holiest fall from grace. The public, of course, caught wind of these secret societies, and the backlash was swift and scandalous. Cartoons showed noblemen dancing with demons, toasting to sin with devils dressed as bishops. The newspapers ran stories of ghostly screams echoing from the abbey, of pagan idols worshipped in the hills, of orgies that summoned storms. Most of it was exaggeration, some of it was not. But Dashwood, ever the politician, embraced the hysteria. When accused in Parliament of lewd bacchanalia, he simply smiled and replied, "My dear sir, it was educational." That line ended up printed on the back of every satirical pamphlet within a week. What's more chilling is how the Hellfire influence leaked into politics. Members included judges, ministers, and even a future prime minister. Laws were passed, taxes levied, appointments made all by men who had days earlier toasted the devil in an underground chapel. The irony wasn't lost on the public. They joked that Britain was ruled by those who bend the knee to Venus by candlelight and demand virtue by daylight. And yet, the club's legacy endured. The abbey was eventually abandoned, but the myth of it grew. Even in the 20th century, rumors persisted that certain aristocratic families still held quiet weekends. In the countryside that bore more resemblance to Medmenham than to any country fete, you walk through what's left of the abbey, now stone walls crumbling, ivy reclaiming secrets. A faint echo follows your steps. Is it laughter? Chanting? Or Simply the sound of too many whispered stories thick in the air? You don't know. But one thing's certain, you'll never hear the phrase secret society the same way again. Not after velvet cloaks, blindfolded rites, and noblemen swearing allegiance to nothing but pleasure, secrecy, and the beautifully blasphemous thrill of being very, very bad. A violin screeches from somewhere behind the curtain, and the scent of ambergris and rosewater coils through the air like a snake. You've just stepped into a Georgian masquerade ball, not the kind staged for politeness and courtship, but the ones whispered about afterward with flushed cheeks and nervous laughter. It's midnight. The chandeliers drip crystal light on deco, marble floors, and no one is who they seem. That dashing gentleman in emerald satin could be a duchess in drag. That delicate ballerina sipping punch, very likely a retired army captain with better legs than your average debutante. Tonight, gender is a costume, morality is a mask, and identity is as fluid as the wine being served from a fountain shaped like Bacchus winking through a ruby-studded blindfold. Welcome to the secret theater of Georgian drag and gender play, where scandal is stitched into every hem and truth is whatever you make it, if only for one night. You feel it immediately, that electric charge when the rules have been suspended, but not entirely discarded. The room moves like a tide, fans fluttering, hands grazing, voices pitched just loud enough to tantalize, but not clarify. A masked figure in a bishop's mitre dances with someone dressed as Cleopatra, and neither of them blinks when a third guest, in full fox-hunting gear and crimson lipstick, cuts in. The anonymity isn't about hiding shame. It's about unleashing fantasy, and the freedom it creates is palpable. Underneath the powdered wigs and brocade, people are playing with power, not just sexual, but social. Gender here isn't fixed. It's a palette, a script, a dare, and this isn't just fringe behavior. These parties are frequented by titled men and well-bred women, poets and diplomats, artists and heiresses. Many of them play it straight in daylight, married with children, servants, and parliamentary duties. But at these gatherings, they swap their surnames for pseudonyms and their rank for roleplay. One baronet is known to arrive in a maid's outfit, complete with apron and feather duster, and insists on being called Miss Lucy. His wife? She comes as a fencing instructor named Jacques. They never speak of it at home, but everyone knows, and no one dares mock them because scandal, when managed properly, can be armor. Drag in the Georgian era wasn't just parody. It was pleasure, performance, and in some cases, protest. Cross-dressing appeared on stages as satire, but in salons and private clubs, it became something more intimate. Men wore dresses not to ridicule femininity, but to access it, embody it, and sometimes seduce through it. Women donned breeches and boots not just to scandalize, but to taste the swagger and space granted to masculinity. Historians still argue whether these performances were mere kink or early expressions of queerness that couldn't yet speak their name. Either way, the effect was real and risky. You overhear someone mention the Chevalier Diana name said, in half jest, half reverence. Dayan, born male and raised as a soldier, spent the first half of life as a decorated diplomat and the second as a woman, claiming a royal edict had affirmed her gender. London adored her, feared her, and speculated wildly. Was she a spy? A prophet? A fraud? She fenced in full skirts, debated in parliament salons, and wrote with the sharpness of a saber. Her memoirs, though chaotic, suggest a person navigating a society that offered no language for who she was. Yet instead of hiding, she performed, loudly, and London, bless its hypocritical heart, watched in fascination. You make your way into a smaller, more shadowed room, less ball, more boudoir. Here, a game of cards is played with stakes not in coins but dares. A man in a nun's habit daintily places a bet and upon losing, is required to recite a love poem to the next person who enters. That person? A woman in a pirate costume, brandishing a feathered whip and a grin that knows too much. The poem is awful. Everyone applauds. Someone suggests a waltz. Another couple disappears behind a velvet curtain. What happens behind it? You don't ask, that's the rule. You can look, you can hint. But if you name things too clearly, the magic breaks. Not all of Georgian society approved, of course. Moralists condemned these events as hellish carnivals of inversion, while preachers thundered about sodomitical rituals and unnatural dress. Parliament debated laws that would outlaw public cross-dressing and the Bow Street. Runners occasionally raided taverns suspected of genderal impropriety. But even with the risk, the masquerades continued. Because for many, they were the only place to be fully seen, even if that meant being deliberately disguised. One letter from a nobleman's valet recalls his master sneaking out, dressed as a dairymaid named Bess, noting that he returned at dawn, with his petticoats askew and the glow of someone who had remembered something important about himself. And these performances bled into art. Portraits from the period show men in women's jewelry, women in military uniform. One famous painting, Venus as Mars, features a noblewoman in full armor, striking a pose of conquest while her foot rests on a discarded wig. Was it a joke? A fantasy? A confession? No one knows. But the painter was paid handsomely, and the subject wore that portrait like a secret badge. Even the theater was infiltrated. Some actresses became famous not just for their talent, but for playing male roles with such intensity that audiences began questioning which parts were performance and which were revelation. Then there are the letters stained with perfume, wax-sealed, tucked into books, and never meant for public eyes. One reads, "Dearest P. Last night I wore your coat and your courage. I danced with 3 women who believed me to be their cousin. I've never felt more honest than when I lied with every step." Another says simply, "In my brother's breeches, I found the courage to kiss her. She let me." These scraps survived fires, floods, and families who'd rather pretend such things never happened. And now, centuries later, they speak louder than ever. As the night winds down, you step outside into the pre-dawn stillness. The ball is fading. Guests unmask one by one, revealing faces that suddenly seem more mysterious without their disguises. The baronet wipes lipstick from his beard. The pirate tips her hat and vanishes into a waiting carriage. You catch a last glance at a woman adjusting her cravat in a hand mirror. She catches your eye and smiles, not slyly, but sincerely, as if to say, "We were never pretending." Not really, and you realize something beautiful. In a society that demanded rigid roles, these masquerades offered a glimpse of something freer, truer. Behind the silks and jokes and theatrical lust was a quiet revolution. People weren't just playing dress-up. They were searching for themselves in the space between scenes, claiming the right to be complicated, contradictory, and deeply human. So next time someone tells you Georgian London was all powdered manners and moral sermons, remember this room, this night, this ballroom of shapeshifters, where gender was fluid, scandal was sacred, and truth wore the most elaborate mask of all. The sermon begins with a cough, soft, polite, the sound of repression trying not to call attention to itself. You're seated halfway down the nave of a Georgian parish church, sunlight filtering through stained glass and golden shafts that somehow make you feel guiltier just for existing. The preacher stands tall in his pulpit, robes spotless, voice syrupy with righteous intent. But as he speaks of sin, damnation, and the dangers of carnal indulgence, you can't help but notice how his eyes keep drifting toward the third pew. Left side, where a certain widow in a violet bonnet crosses her legs a little too slowly. He stumbles on a passage. She smiles. The organist coughs again. Welcome to the sanctified theater of Georgian piety, where the sermons are sharp, the pews are full, and half the congregation is thinking about something very different from salvation. You begin to realize, as you scan the room, That church in Georgian London isn't just about God, it's about optics. It's where the gentry parade their virtue while discreetly surveying who's sitting with whom, who's noticeably absent, and who's had the nerve to wear last season's embroidery. But beneath the layers of lace and liturgy lies a quiet absurdity. Some of the most insistent voices against vice are the ones best acquainted with it. That preacher condemning fornication and foreign women. He's rumored to frequent a brothel near Soho where the staff wear cassocks as part of the act. And he's not even the most scandalous man on the pulpit. Let me introduce you to Reverend D, a clergyman so charismatic he once had to be reassigned because too many of his parishioners, male and female, were following him home after evensong. He preached about restraint with such sensual cadence that some described his sermons as verbal embraces. One diarist wrote, "I came to church to hear of heaven, and instead found myself considering mortal longings." Reverend D was eventually relocated after a scandal involving a curate, a misplaced chalice, and a note that read, "Forgive me, Father, for I may do it again." Whether the note was planted or penned in passion is still debated, but the chalice was never recovered. And then there's the notorious Vicar of T, who, despite delivering weekly sermons on modesty, was eventually revealed to have written anonymous erotic poems under the pseudonym The Midnight Penitent. One of his verses begins, "Beneath the cassock, breath and burning," and ends with lines best not repeated near holy water. His identity was uncovered only when a local printer noticed the vicar's distinctive habit of using semicolons where others would not. Far from denying it, the vicar confessed, though he insisted it was to better understand the sinner's struggle. His bishop was unimpressed, but his readership doubled overnight. You might think these are isolated cases, but the overlap between clerical virtue and very secular scandal was in truth a quiet epidemic. Parish records reveal suspicious payments made to housemaids, midwives, and boarding houses, often under vague headings like special care or confidential necessity. A surprising number of baptism entries are annotated with small, cryptic symbols that scholars believe may denote children of clergymen born out of wedlock. Historians still argue whether these were errors, euphemisms, or acts of quiet rebellion. But one thing is clear, the collar didn't make the man, and the pulpit didn't always lead to purity. And yet, Georgian congregations were complicit. They gossiped, yes, but they also protected their own. A preacher who stirred the soul could be forgiven almost anything, as long as he kept delivering compelling homilies and didn't get anyone too important pregnant. In some parishes, rumors of a priest's indiscretion actually increased attendance. One lady wrote to her sister, "He preaches with the weight of a man who knows what he resists, or perhaps what he regrets." And in one particularly bizarre instance, a rector's popularity soared after he was caught in a compromising position with the choir mistress. The scandal? He was wearing her bonnet. His defense? "It calms my nerves during sermon prep." The bishop's response was lukewarm. The congregation's was enthusiastic. Of course, not all stories ended in giggles and gossip. Some took darker turns. A well-documented case involves a country parson who seduced several of his young female parishioners under the guise of spiritual healing. When confronted, he insisted the encounters were acts of biblical correction, citing obscure scripture and bizarre metaphors involving figs. He was defrocked, but not before two of the girls were quietly sent away, and the third married off to a distant cousin. Their names faded. His poetry did not, but it wasn't just the men behind the pulpit. Clergy wives, too, often lived double lives, some out of necessity, others out of pure rebellion. One bishop's wife was known to host charity readings that were, in fact, elaborate salons where poetry, flirtation, and carefully curated scandal were served alongside Madeira and candied almonds. Another vicar's widow took a lover half her age and defended the affair by quoting St. Augustine, "Lord, make me chaste but not yet." That line, by the way, became a favorite among satirical pamphleteers, often reworked as, "Make me modest but leave me lace." Even the architecture of churches couldn't escape gossip. Some pews had curtains, not just for warmth, but for privacy. Rumors flew about what happened behind those drapes during especially long sermons. One scandal involved a baronet and his cousin's wife, caught during the reading of Corinthians. The irony was not lost on anyone. In another church, a secret passage from the vicar's office to the bell tower was discovered. Its purpose? Ostensibly for emergencies. Unofficially, it was known as the Curate's Express. The church was repainted. The tunnel was not sealed. You pass by a churchyard and hear an old man telling a story to two boys perched on a gravestone. That one, he says, pointing at a headstone, was a reverend who loved two things: wine and women. Preached hellfire by day, danced by moonlight with the cook. She buried him with his boots on, said he'd want to be ready. The boys laugh, so do you. Because in Georgian London, salvation was serious, but sin was spectacular. So the next time you hear a preacher thunder about temptation, imagine him slipping on a velvet glove after hours. Picture the choir boy with a knowing smirk. Recall the widow with the violet bonnet and the sermon she never quite listened to. Because sometimes the most scandalous stories aren't the ones shouted in taverns, but whispered, softly, from the very mouths that claim to guard your soul. You're inside the palace now, past the marbled halls and gilded staircases, where the rugs are too thick for footsteps and the portraits too smug to be innocent. There's silence here, but not peace. It's the kind of silence that hums beneath every royal curtain, curls under every canopied bed, and swells behind every glance not quite held long enough. You move softly through the chambers, half expecting to be scolded for breathing too loudly, but no one stops you. Because here, in the corridors of kings and queens, discretion is not just a virtue, it's a currency. And the economy of rumor? Thriving. Every eye you pass, every handmaid with a polished gaze, every footman standing just a little too still, they all know something. Not officially, of course, but unofficially. They are the living archive of royal intimacy. And tonight, you're about to understand why in Georgian England, even monarchs couldn't close their bedroom doors without an audience. You're ushered quietly into the king's private chambers. The first thing you notice is the sheer number of people who aren't supposed to be there, and yet absolutely are. There's the royal dresser, of course, the equerry, the footman, the page boys, a chaplain nearby, trying to look anywhere but the bed, even a royal clockmaker, adjusting something in the corner while desperately pretending not to overhear the queen asking the king if he's still thinking of that opera singer. You blink. Wait. That wasn't whispered. That was said plainly, like discussing the weather. Because here's the secret. The royal bedchamber is not private. Not really. Not in this era. In fact, it's one of the most public rooms in the monarchy's architecture of control. There is, in Georgian tradition, an ancient and absurd custom known as the lever and the coucher, the formal ceremonies of waking and sleeping. These weren't just rituals. They were full-on performances. Courtiers were invited to watch the king wake up, pray, dress, eat, and prepare for the day. Then, in the evening, others would be invited to witness him being undressed and tucked into bed, not symbolically, literally. There were documented occasions when over a dozen nobles crammed into a room to watch George remove his wig and get into his nightshirt. No applause, but certainly gossip. It was all part of reinforcing the king's body as public property. The more people saw him, the more real his authority became. That's the logic, at least, but underneath it, an entire network of whispered scandal and suspicious silences. Because once you normalize watching the king disrobe, you normalize watching who else might be in the room. And let's just say that not every evening ended with the monarch alone under the sheets. George II was known to have a rotating schedule of visits from favored courtiers, some female, Some, according to one valet, not of that persuasion. When Queen Caroline was alive, things were discreet, even dull. But after her death, George's nighttime habits became the subject of countless servant whispers, particularly regarding his obsession with a certain Lady Yarmouth, whose presence in the royal bedchamber outlasted several court appointments and at least 2 wars. Whether or not she shared the king's bed every night remains uncertain. What is certain? She had her own key. And in Georgian London, keys told stories louder than trumpets. You find a letter, slightly frayed at the edges, in an old archival box labeled Miscellaneous Household Accounts. It's unsigned but written in a hand so precise it must belong to someone who handles money or secrets. The writer lists expenses for candles, linen, and repairs to the Queen's second chamber door, damaged during an episode of disorderly haste. The phrase is a euphemism for something, clearly, but what? One historian speculates that it references a well-documented night when a foreign ambassador accidentally entered the wrong room while inebriated and found the Queen's hairdresser in bed, not alone. The court tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. The pamphleteers, however, didn't let it go. The next morning, a broadsheet titled "The Frenchman, the Friseur," and the flannel gown sold out in hours. Even Queen Charlotte wasn't spared. Though often portrayed as devout and demure, rumors buzzed around her like flies around a royal banquet. Some whispered that she had an emotional intimacy with her ladies-in-waiting. One particularly bold sheet claimed she wrote daily letters to a Madame R, filled with poetry and pressed flowers. The letters were never found. Or maybe they were, and simply buried. The palace was very good at burying things. And then there's the scandal no one in court dares to speak above a whisper: George III's madness. Not because he suffered, but because of what he revealed while unraveling. During his episodes, he spoke of lovers no one had ever known, addressed invisible figures as "my precious sins," and once allegedly recited a list of names he called "my collection of regrets." One servant recorded hearing the king call out in the dead of night, "Forgive me, James," followed by an hour of sobbing. No official record confirms this, but servants told servants, and eventually, the name James appeared in a satirical poem scrawled on a tavern wall. The king weeps still for Jamie's hand, not lost in war, but love unplanned. It was quickly painted over, but ink has a way of sinking deep. Even the architecture aided gossip. Hidden doors, service passages, connecting staircases, all designed for discretion, but often used for rendezvous. One famous anecdote involves a duchess who trapped in the king's dressing room during a surprise visit from his chaplain, hid inside a linen closet for 3 hours, emerging only when the coast was clear and the bed was already turned down. Her name was never recorded, but her shoe was left behind. It became a sort of relic, passed among palace maids, and eventually sold at auction with the title "The Duchess's Escape." Royal children weren't spared either. The Prince Regent, future George IV, was perhaps the most scandal-prone of them all. His affairs were public, messy, and expensive. He had at least one secret wife, possibly 2, and wrote love letters so florid they made Byron seem bashful. In one, he writes, "Your breath makes the morning tolerable. Your arms, my crown." She allegedly replied, "Send diamonds. Breath is not enough." The letters were leaked by a dismissed chambermaid who claimed she found them under a chamber pot. That might be poetic license, but given the location, we'll allow it. As you leave the palace, the silence resumes, heavy again, but now you hear it differently. It's not quiet, it's curated, managed. The court understood what modern PR firms are only now perfecting. You don't stop scandal. You stage it. You choreograph the fallout. You bury one truth with another shinier lie. And if the king must be watched while he sleeps, so be it. Just make sure the right people are watching, and the wrong ones are paid to look away. You wake to the sound of pages rustling, not from a book, but from bodies moving beneath them. as if literature itself is trying to exhale something it's kept hidden for centuries. The scent in the room is ink, candle wax, and something more human, sweat maybe, or longing. You're in a private library somewhere off Bloomsbury, and the host, a philosopher with a silver tongue and silk waistcoat, is setting up chairs for a reading. But not just any reading. Tonight's discussion is on the passions, and the crowd knows exactly what that means. Behind the polished spines of Kant and Rousseau, behind dusty volumes of Locke and Hume, lies a very Georgian contradiction. A city that preaches restraint while secretly studying ecstasy like it's a science. Welcome to the age of enlightenment, but with fewer wigs and more moaning. The host taps his glass and smiles. My friends, he says, tonight we discuss the freedom of the flesh. A few giggle, others sip Madeira, but all lean in. You realize quickly that what's being explored isn't just pleasure, it's philosophy. This is the side of enlightenment they didn't teach you in school. Voltaire's bedroom wit, Diderot's theories on sensuality, Hume's quietly scandalous admiration for female intelligence that often ended in long walks and longer letters. These thinkers weren't just men of reason. They were men of appetite, arguing not that desire distracted from intellect, but that it sharpened it. And in Georgian London, that idea was catching fire, especially in salons where candles burned low and conversation turned licentious by the third course. You glance at the woman beside you, dressed in midnight blue, her eyes scanning the room, like a cat choosing which mouse to chase. Her copy of the Kama Sutra, a bootleg translation, of course, is dog-eared and underlined in pencil. It's not about the poses, she whispers. It's about power. She's right. These Enlightenment readers weren't just chasing novelty, they were chasing control, freedom. A new framework for sex that wasn't chained to sin, but elevated to an art. Historians still argue whether these ideas truly liberated anyone, or simply gave elite men better excuses to sleep around. But in that moment, the woman in blue is rewriting her own rules. And she's not the only one. Across the city, radical booksellers begin importing texts on Eastern sexuality. Translations of the Kama Sutra, the Ananga Ranga, and the Perfumed Garden start to appear in locked drawers and whispered transactions. These aren't academic works. They're smuggled, hidden, sometimes bound in plain covers labeled agricultural notes. One collector boasts of hiding his copy between treatises on crop rotation. Another swears he read all of Foucault's early essays with a French Indian erotica volume tucked inside the dust jacket. Whether true or not, the implication is clear. The pursuit of knowledge was no longer just cerebral. It had hips, breath, and the occasional writing crop. And it's not just imported philosophy. Local writers join the fray. William Blake's poems glow with mystic sensuality, his angels sometimes naked, his lovers divine and strange. One of his etchings depicts a man and woman entwined in what critics called allegorical embrace, but you definitely call something else. Mary Wollstonecraft, mother of feminism, writes not only of women's rights, but of the hunger for equality and passion. In her letters, she describes nights of delirious affection, and though sanitized for Victorian readers, the originals hint at a woman fully alive to her desires. Even her later heartbreaks, raw, embarrassing, deeply human, became political. Because to admit love, in all its mess, was revolutionary. At an underground lecture near Holborn, a group of self-proclaimed new rationalists stage a mock trial of Victorian prudery. The defendant is chastity, personified by a blindfolded mannequin in a corset, while the prosecutor quotes passages from ancient Greek poetry and French libertine prose. You watch as one speaker claims, "It is irrational to deny the body when the brain demands it." Another counters, "Desire is not the enemy of virtue, it is its foundation." The audience votes. Chastity loses. Everyone drinks, but not everyone's smiling. As the Enlightenment flirts with sexual freedom, backlash simmers. Clerics thunder from pulpits. A pamphlet titled "The Corruption of the Thinking Man" circulates, claiming that reading Rousseau leads directly to orgies and irreligion. Ironically, it sells well. Some critics accuse these libertines of trading one dogma for another, that they worship freedom, the way previous generations worship sin. And perhaps they do. One essayist notes that the new intellectual salons sometimes feel more like harem auditions than debates. Still, the ideas catch on, reshaping the way society thinks not just about sex, but about power, morality, and personal truth. One of the era's most bizarre publications is The Erotic Spirit Through History, a sprawling illustrated tome that traces human sexuality from Babylon to Bloomsbury. The Georgian edition includes not just engravings of ancient fertility rites, but essays on the orgasm as political liberation. One chapter, subtitled "The Enlightened Bed," suggests that mutual climax is the only form of truly democratic exchange. It sounds ridiculous. It's also the most quoted section in certain circles of Soho. The printer reportedly kept extra copies hidden behind a false wall, only selling to customers who asked for the illuminated volume. And then there are the salons themselves. Some are highbrow, candlelit gatherings of poets and philosophers. Others are low-lit dens of smoke and silk, where the readings often devolve into reenactments. One particularly infamous hostess, known only as Madame E, stages a dinner where each course corresponds to a philosophical treatise and a sexual dare. The main course? A reading from Spinoza followed by blindfolded foot massages. Dessert involves ice cream and very creative uses of spoons. No minutes are taken, but the guests leave glowing. Madame E becomes legend. The street outside her townhouse is renamed Reason's Alley in whispered jest. Even the architecture shifts. Certain homes in Mayfair begin including reading rooms designed for two-cushioned alcoves with low shelves and hidden compartments for books, too scandalous for the main library. Architects joke that they're designing for both enlightenment and entanglement. Carpenters begin including secret drawers and writing desks, not for valuables, but for letters never meant to be sent. Because alongside this intellectual awakening is a surge in correspondence. Lovers write like scholars, scholars write like seducers. A philosopher's note to his mistress reads, "You are the proof of my thesis. You unravel my logic with your thighs." She writes back, then, "I shall be your contradiction, nightly." By dawn, you leave the salon with more questions than answers, but also with a strange clarity. The Georgian Enlightenment isn't about cold reason replacing warm blood. It's about combining them, making knowledge erotic and desire intelligent. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it still lingers. Because in those candle-lit rooms, people weren't just debating ideas. They were becoming them. One touch, one glance, one whispered line at a time. The taproom smells like sweat and sulfur. Not fire, not quite, but something close, as if sin has a scent. And in this corner of Georgian London, it clings to everything. A man leans over a pint, his voice slurred but intent, whispering a tale that makes the candle gutter. He rotted, he says, from the inside out, and she stayed with him till his nose fell off. Someone mutters a prayer. Another laughs too loud. You sip your drink, and the tavern keeper, without asking, places a fresh one before you. He's heard that story before. You're in a place where everyone has, because this isn't just the age of scandal. This is the age of venereal terror. The era where sex didn't just risk your reputation. It could quite literally melt your face. And yet, people still did it. Night after night. Like moths flirting with a particularly diseased flame. Georgian London was a city that both craved and feared desire. On one side of the street, powdered wigs, subtle fans, whispered flirtation. On the other, rashes, secrecy, and remedies that might cure you or kill you faster. Syphilis wasn't a punchline here. It was an epidemic with a twist. It was fashionable. A disease of the rich, a badge of experience, even in some warped circles, a marker of elite indulgence. The French disease, they called it, because blaming the French was tradition, even when the infection was local. It came with symptoms so grotesque they inspired both horror and gallows humor. Rotting gums, lesions, blindness, insanity. And yet, no scandal was complete without a hint of it. Gossip often added it to the mix just to spice up a tale. He danced too close to the Duchess, they'd say. And now he walks with a cane. You wander into an apothecary near St. Paul's where the shelves are lined with vials promising miracles. Mercury ointments, herbal tinctures, suspicious powders labeled cure for pox. The apothecary himself has a strange smile and no eyebrows another. Rumor says he tested his wares on himself. You ask about the most popular remedy. He shows you a tin of blue pills. They'll clear your conscience, he says, if not your conscience's cause. The pills are mercury-based, toxic, sometimes lethal. But they sell faster than gin. There's no real cure, just hope wrapped in a pretty label. Still, people buy them, because what's the alternative? Celibacy? You pass by a printing house. A new pamphlet is being set, The Lamentations of Lord Ull. It's a satirical poem about a nobleman whose member turned to wax after a night in Covent Garden. Crude, certainly, but the underlying fear? Palpable. These pamphlets aren't just funny. They're warnings. Cautionary tales wrapped in rhymes, circulated widely, read aloud in taverns and whispered between bedposts. Some even come with illustrations, woodcuts of inflamed faces, bandaged groins, haunted eyes. A whole genre of erotic caution emerges. One handbill titled The Maiden's Guide to Unmarked Men claims to teach women how to spot syphilitics from 20 feet. Beware those who scratch too often, it warns, or whose noses are touched by handkerchief more than nature. And here's where things get truly Georgian. The disease becomes fashion. No, really. Rouge is applied more liberally to cover facial discoloration. Perfume usage spikes, not just for attraction, but to mask the smell of ulcers. People start wearing patches, black velvet spots on the skin, originally to hide sores, but eventually becoming decorative. Some wear them in the shape of stars, moons, even tiny animals. It's both camouflage and couture. One satirical print shows a lady, covered in patches, smiling demurely, the caption reading, "Beautiful in blotches, pure in pox." Even the royal court isn't spared. Whispers float that the Prince Regent, he of the flamboyant waistcoats and catastrophic love affairs, suffered from bouts of southern decay. As one physician delicately put it, he reportedly commissioned a special blend of mercury paste, mixed with lavender oil, applied nightly by his valet. Historians still argue whether the prince's later mental fog was syphilitic or simply self-inflicted, via overindulgence and underdiagnosis. Either way, his lovers thinned, but his appetite didn't. One mistress famously said, he had the breath of a rotting library but the persistence of a debt collector. She wrote it in her memoir, long after he'd stopped sending her gloves. But it wasn't just syphilis. Gonorrhea, then called the clap, was rampant, especially among young officers and students. The name allegedly comes from the painful sensation, clapping down during urination, though others argue it refers to the early, brutal treatment, slapping the afflicted member between wooden boards to expel discharge. Yes, you read that correctly. Georgian medicine was equal parts guesswork and sadism. One treatment involved injecting silver nitrate directly into the urethra. Another prescribed a strict diet of milk, oats, and solitude. Neither worked. Both hurt. Still, in the margins of all this pain, something oddly progressive begins to flicker. Physicians begin talking tentatively about transmission, about consent, about hygiene. The idea of preventative care stirs. Condoms, then called French letters or armor, begin appearing in brothels and apothecaries. Made from sheep intestines and tied with ribbon, they're reusable, uncomfortable, but surprisingly popular. A scandal erupts when a nobleman is caught sending his mistress a bundle of them by post. The letter is intercepted. The press mocks him as the Marquis of Membranes. He leaves town in disgrace. His mistress stays. Opens a discreet shop in Soho. Sells out of stock by noon. And while men suffer in visible ways, women once again suffer. In silence. For them, the signs are subtler, the treatment's crueler, and the blame immediate. A woman infected is assumed guilty, fallen, damned. Physicians hesitate to treat them, fearing scandal. Midwives become underground doctors, offering quiet care and sympathetic ears. One midwife writes in her journal, "They come to me red with shame, not blood. And yet it is I who must tell them what no man dares." She keeps a drawer of notes and keepsakes from patients too afraid to speak publicly. Some return, years later, just to say thank you. Others never do. Perhaps the strangest twist in all of this. Some courtesans become experts, amateur physicians, herbalists, and diagnosticians. They learn which remedies work, parsley tea, vinegar rinses, which are fatal, mercury suppositories, lead-based creams. Some even reject clients who show symptoms. One famed mistress kept a black list of diseased patrons and shared it with her rivals. It wasn't morality, it was survival. In a world where sex could kill you slowly, information became the most intimate gift. You walk out of the taproom into the evening fog. The city glows with candlelight and risk. Somewhere a scandal is beginning. Somewhere else, someone is already paying for one. And you realize that in Georgian London, sex was never just pleasure or shame. It was a gamble, a rebellion, a whispered promise that might end in ecstasy or exile. But they did it anyway. Because desire, even when dangerous, was still better than silence. Still more alive than fear. The letter is short, 12 lines of uneven ink on thick paper, and yet it crackles like a fuse. You read it once, twice, and feel your heart catch by the third line. "She knows about the child," it says. "I suggest you leave town before Parliament does." There's no signature. There doesn't need to be. In Georgian London, a love letter isn't always about love. Sometimes it's a bomb disguised in poetry, a confession sharpened into a blade, a political weapon with lace at the edges. Tonight, you're stepping into the shadowy world where scandal isn't just survival or spectacle, it's strategy. Where the right rumor, dropped at the right moment, can topple a minister faster than any vote. You duck into the salon of a known Whig sympathizer, where decanters glisten and arguments bloom like fungi in the corners. There's a buzz in the room, Parliament is on edge, and everyone knows why. A certain earl has been spotted with a woman who is not his wife, which normally wouldn't raise an eyebrow. But this woman? She's French, Catholic, and recently seen slipping a note to a member of the opposition during a masquerade. It's the perfect storm. The Tory pamphlets are already being inked. "Foreign whispers in English beds," one headline threatens. Another cries, "The Earl, the Jezebel, and the Jesuit." The papers haven't even hit the street yet, but the damage is done. By morning, he's a liability. By next week, he'll be a memory. Historians still debate whether the scandal was orchestrated by rivals or simply seized upon with glee. But that's the point. In Georgian politics, the truth was a secondary concern. Reputation, real, manufactured, or mutilated, was everything. If your enemies couldn't beat your arguments, they'd beat your image. A misplaced note, an overheard comment, even a suspicious bracelet could become evidence. One lord allegedly lost his bid for office because of an anonymous drawing left on a tavern wall, him and a stable boy, entwined in ink and shame. No signature, no source. But the vote count said enough. You find a stack of satirical prints in a bookseller's drawer, each one more vicious than the last. One depicts a bishop caught in a compromising position with a naked allegory of greed. Another shows a judge marrying Lady Lust while truth weeps in the corner. These aren't just jokes. They're strategic blows. A single engraving, copied and passed through hands, could undermine a lifetime of political capital. Georgian London didn't just weaponize scandal, it industrialized it. And then there's the case of Mrs. Bellamy, an actress and socialite, who found herself at the center of a political firestorm after a bundle of letters meant for her lover, a prominent MP, were stolen and leaked. The letters, full of breathless praise and even breathier innuendo, painted the MP as a man easily swayed by feminine charm. One line in particular, "I await your vote as I await your touch, trembling and deliciously unsure," became infamous. The opposition turned it into a toast. The MP denied everything. Mrs. Bellamy fled to the countryside, only to return with a memoir that sold out by the second printing. She didn't clear her name, but she did buy a new house. Sometimes, losing the narrative was more profitable than controlling it. In secret societies and private clubs, politicians joked about scandal insurance, not real policies of course, but social arrangements. If you caught wind of a rival's affair, you might hold it in reserve. Wait for the perfect moment to accidentally let it slip at a dinner party. Or better, you forge a letter, hint at impropriety, and then let your enemy exhaust themselves proving it false. By then, no one cares. As one wig strategist put it, denying is worse than confessing. A lie denied is twice remembered. But it wasn't just men playing this game. Women, too, learned to manipulate the machinery of scandal. Lady Holland, for instance, was a master tactician. When rumors swirled about her affair with a foreign ambassador, she leaned into them, draped herself in French fabrics, spoke in affected accents, and even quoted Rousseau at parties. The gossip exploded. Her husband, furious, tried to suppress the rumors. But Lady Holland? She published a letter to the English public, accusing her husband of cruelty, bad poetry, and worse table manners. The public sided with her. He retreated. She became a cult figure. She understood what many didn't. If you can't kill the scandal, you ride it like a parade float. And the irony is, many of these public figures had done far worse in private. But only the leaked, the overheard, the misdelivered became political currency. Georgian politics wasn't about privacy, it was about perception. You could be as debauched as you pleased, so long as the public didn't know, or at least believed they were in on the joke. One Tory peer was notorious for his weekend parties involving philosophical nudity. But when a servant sold the story to a radical pamphlet, the peer responded by claiming it was an experiment in Enlightenment egalitarianism. The defense was so absurd it worked. He kept his seat. The servant disappeared. Of course, the royal family remained the ultimate prize in the scandal game. Every rumor about the Prince Regent's affairs was worth its weight in political gold. When whispers began that he'd secretly married a Catholic widow, anti-Catholic factions had a field day. Pamphlets cried, "The pretender's groom," while others claimed the marriage was a French plot. Parliament discussed the scandal behind closed doors. Nothing was proven. But the damage lingered. The prince himself, ever the showman, never denied it outright. "Let them write," he once said. "It's cheaper than commissioning portraits." Even when caught red-handed, the Georgian elite learned to spin. A certain viscount, discovered in flagrante delicto with a fellow MP's wife, reportedly stood up, adjusted his cravat, and said, "I was simply debating the motion." The line appeared in at least 3 plays within a year. He lost no standing. The MP's wife, however, was exiled to a cousin's estate. That was the other rule of scandal. In politics, it was only fatal if you didn't know how to laugh at it. Or if you were a woman, you end your night at a quiet gentleman's club in Soho, where the real deals are struck over brandy and half-truths. A man beside you whispers that the Prime Minister once received blackmail letters written in rhyme. Another swears that a rival's downfall began when someone published a fake love poem in his handwriting. He never wrote it, the man says, but it sounded like he would. And that perhaps is the most Georgian twist of all. Scandal didn't need to be true. It only needed to feel true. In a society addicted to narrative, perception was policy. The story was the strategy. So as you sip your drink and watch the gaslights flicker, remember, in this world, a single kiss could start a war, a single letter could end a career, and a well-timed rumor could move the gears of empire. Georgian politics wasn't just about power. It was about drama. And in the theater of parliament, the most dangerous weapon was never the sword, it was the quill. You wake to a sound not church bells or market calls, but the shrill rhythmic cries of a street hawker. Scandal for a penny. Ruin for a halfpence. The Duchess's downfall 2 for 1. You're barely dressed when you step outside into the noise of Georgian London's most vibrant addiction, the tabloid machine. The sky is gray with soot, the cobblestones slick with last night's gin, and in every direction you look, there's a child or crippled veteran shoving crumpled sheets into strangers' hands. Some hawk broadsides covered in gossip. Others flaunt tiny booklets folded like contraband, thin enough to hide in your glove, spicy enough to get you barred from any reputable dinner table. This is the city's true pulse, not parliament, not palace, but print. And it beats with ink and innuendo. You reach for one of the fresh sheets, still damp from press oil, and unfold it to find a crude cartoon. A powdered noblewoman straddling a lion, her breasts out, her wig askew, a sash labeled virtue trailing behind like toilet paper on a shoe. It's obscene, it's hilarious, it's everywhere. And no one dares sue. Because here, reputation is a market and scandal is the product. The Georgian tabloid industry didn't start by accident. It was engineered. London was growing. More readers, more presses, more literacy, and a bottomless appetite for spectacle. Traditional news was expensive and dull, mostly politics and trade. But scandal? That was cheap, fast, and wildly democratic. Anyone with a grudge, a good quill, and access to a press could publish a pamphlet accusing Lady This of sleeping with Lord That. No proof needed. Just the right adjectives and a suggestive metaphor. The streets did the rest. You step into a print shop near Fleet Street. Inside, 2 boys are folding broadsides, while the printer dictates to a woman scribbling furiously with inky hands. No, he says. Don't write kissed. Write ravished. People pay for ravished. She nods, scratches it out, and replaces the word. You glance over her shoulder at the title, A Midnight Intrusion at Montague House. It's part fiction, part gossip, part thinly veiled blackmail. But it'll sell. Especially because of the illustration, a crude etching of a noble woman climbing out of a window in nothing but stockings and shame. The face is anonymous. The pose isn't. Some publications are subtle. Others embrace the vulgar. One popular tabloid, the Rambler's Register, publishes lists of mistresses ranked by accomplishments, which include categories like toe dexterity and creative utterances. Another, the Covent Garden Miscellany, offers reviews of local brothels as if they're fine dining establishments. Madame Henrietta's offers the best blend of discipline and discretion. One reads, Avoid Nellies unless you enjoy fleas and prayer. It's vile, it's detailed, and it circulates among politicians, poets, and bored housewives alike. But the real power lies in the catchpenny papers, quickly printed one-sheets. Sold on corners, reporting half-truths and quarter-facts with such conviction, they may as well be scripture. One morning, a catchpenny headline claims a bishop was caught in a compromising position with an Italian sculptor. By lunchtime, the sculptor's name is on everyone's lips. By evening, the bishop has canceled 3 appearances and quietly left town. It didn't matter that the sculptor didn't exist. The story did. And here's the truly Georgian twist. People wanted to be in these papers. Well, not always, but enough did. A scandal in the right paper could destroy you or make you. One minor actress named Miss P went from unknown to theater darling after a pamphlet falsely accused her of seducing a duke in his pew. She denied it, loudly, tearfully, publicly. Then, 3 weeks later, she posed for a satirical portrait titled Piety's Temptation. Sales soared. So did ticket prices to her next play. Her manager, it said, commissioned the original. Story himself. That's the game. Plausible scandal, strategic denial, profitable fallout. A nobleman with debts might accidentally leak love letters to a widowed countess, then pretend outrage while quietly selling the story rights. A viscountess with flagging influence might flirt too publicly at Vauxhall Gardens, knowing full while the cartoonists were watching. Scandal became a form of PR, dangerous, yes, but also oddly empowering. If you could control the narrative, you could control the damage. And sometimes even thrive on it. One of the most notorious scandal publishers was a man known only as the Ink Ghost. He never signed his name, but his style was unmistakable. Biting, theatrical, just literary enough to be quoted at parties, just filthy enough to get banned in Bath. He once published a 6-part series called Lords in Lace, chronicling real and imagined affairs between male aristocrats and their manservants. Each piece ended with a pun so vile, even the printers blushed. Yet his papers sold out faster than any sermon. Theories swirled. He was a disgraced clergyman, a vengeful former mistress, a noble himself. He was never caught. But the rumor that he was actually a woman persists to this day and only made his reputation more legendary. You watch as one scandal sheet is packed into a parcel bound for a country estate. That's the other truth. The scandal machine wasn't just for the masses. It was for everyone. Dukes read them. Countesses quoted them. Even the king, it said, requested certain issues be reviewed before they hit the street. Some say he edited them himself. True or not, the implication was delicious. And in Georgian London, delicious was better than accurate. But the print game wasn't without risks. Several editors were jailed for libel, though often released after bribing the right magistrate. One woman, a printer's widow, was arrested for publishing a satire about a baronet's mammalian excesses. The phrase was never explained. The fine was enormous. She paid it with the profits from the next 3 issues. Another scandal writer was beaten in the street by a group of angry footmen after implying their mistress engaged in naked calligraphy. He returned to work the next day with a black eye and twice the circulation. You pause near a vendor, shouting, scandal, secrets, seductions, and shame, and realize this isn't just entertainment. It's currency, influence, control. The tabloid machine gave voice to the voiceless, platform to the petty, and ruin to the reckless. It was brutal, yes, but it was also a strange form of justice. In the courts, power could buy silence. In the press, anyone with a pen could shout that in now. As night falls and the flickering gas lamps cast shadows over printed sins, you wonder what tomorrow's headlines will hold. Whose affair will be exposed? Whose innocence will be mocked? Who will rise and who will fall beneath the weight of a scandal no one can prove but everyone believes? In Georgian London, the press didn't report reality, it manufactured it. And once your name appeared in print, for better or worse, you belonged to the city. Forever inked, forever whispered, forever remembered. You tread into an open piazza under an overcast sky mottled with soot and anticipation. The air vibrates with nervous electricity, like the city itself is leaning in to listen. Today's spectacle isn't in court or salon, it's in the public. Theater of shame behind elegantly shuttered gates. You arrive at the scene of yet another scandalous twist, a disgrace turned public performance, and maybe your new obsession. Ladies and gentlemen are gathered outside a townhouse draped in black crepe. At its door stands a gaunt herald shouting, "Hear thee, the shame of Lord unraveled." A crowd jostles for pamphlets, ready to clutch the latest issue that promises sex, betrayal, and possibly suicide. Scandal has become ritual, and you've just stepped into its final act. Inside, through barred windows, the curtains twitch as servants try to contain the damage. Word is, Lady R has filed for annulment on grounds so salacious they're being whispered in every drawing room. A pamphlet, already in its fourth printing, accuses her of a decade-long affair that produced 2 children and at least 1 secret will. The husband counters with a revenge pamphlet listing her alleged lovers and their nationalities: Italian, French, Irish, all hailed for gallantry and swooned over as heroes. What catches your attention most isn't the accusations themselves, but their tone. Proud, defiant, theatrical. Lady R refuses to slip quietly into the country. Instead, she's shipping pamphlet caricatures of herself to every duchess and gallery in London. Scandal isn't destroying her, it's promoting her. Because in Georgian London, public shame is a performance and only the best actors win the crowd. You slip under the fence and find yourself in a courtyard where pamphleteers stand in smug circles, trading copies like duels. One vendor quotes the price with flourish: 2 pence for the truth, 3 for the half-truth, and 4 for the fantasy. Opportunities are everywhere, and everyone holds a role. A servant girl is folding leaflets with trembling fingers. Her neighbor hisses, "Be quick, dear," before they change the story again. Because the scandal churns so fast that yesterday's truth becomes today's rumor by lunchtime. Historians still argue whether these stories were driven by genuine betrayal or by a profit machine that needed fresh lore every hour. Either way, performance trumps authenticity. Sensation is currency. Even the architecture becomes part of the act. The townhouse is now plastered with broadsheets, handbills, idiots plastered against the shutters, posters stapled to door frames, lines scored into the pavement with chalk. The black draped ribbons at the windows are silent except for one flicker, where a masked woman watches from behind the glass. Nodding dutifully, you wonder, is she Lady R? Or someone hired to play the part? In Georgian scandal, authenticity is secondary. The image matters more than the substance. You overhear a bystander mention a detail. Did you know Lady R once introduced her maid as her sister at the opera, to keep the lovers guessing? The story stings like lemon in an open cut. Or maybe it's another rumor. Enough people nod, squint, whisper such audacity under cocktails, the rumor becomes real. Then someone laughs and asks, "Is it adultery if both parties know about it?" The bystanders snap to attention. That question, not the fact, becomes tomorrow's debate. A carriage rolls by, sudden style, pulled by high steppers whose harness bells echo scandal. A well-dressed woman drops an envelope at a vendor's feet. He picks it up, scans it, tucks it into a new edition printed that morning. It's the editor's copy. The crowds gasp as the envelope's handwriting matches the noble seal on the pamphlet inside. The scandal is now archived, authenticated, immortal. You realize, in Georgian London, scandal is only as potent as the document that confirms it. Letters aren't evidence, they're stage directions. Back on the street, a painter. Sketching the scene adds exaggerations, fanned lace, throbbing eyebrows, powdered tears. His prints will be sold alongside pamphlets, and in weeks they'll end up in thieves' markets as caricatures of shame. The moment becomes art, and art becomes history. Even after the scandal dies, the image persists. Meanwhile, Lady R's adversaries smear her reputation in salons across Mayfair. But she fights back, hosting morning teas, distributing subtle thank you notes to magistrates, commissioning portraits where she stands erect, crowned by an olive branch. Her public persona is a rebuttal in portrait form. She doesn't deny, she redraws the story. Historians still argue whether people remember the facts or the narrative she commandeered. The answer? They remember the version she performed. You lean against a lamppost as evening falls. Gaslight flickers on cobblestone where pamphlets lie like fallen petals. You pick one up, only half the story is printed here. The rest is blank, waiting for someone else to write it. And maybe that's the genius of scandal in Georgian London. It's never finished. You don't arrive, you endure. And you divine, walking. Away, you hear a rival vendor shouting a new headline. Lady our size, they see my strength. They fear my silence. It's poetic. It's vague. And most importantly, it's not true, or maybe it is. Only time will tell. In Georgian London, scandal always ends, but sometimes the echo lasts forever. You wake to a silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like anticipation. The streets of Georgian London have quieted for now, but beneath the polished shoes and powdered wigs, the city still hums. It's a slow, patient hum, like a match being struck in slow motion. Today's scandal hasn't exploded yet, but it will. You can feel it in the breathless smiles of servants, the way a gloved hand lingers too long on a fan, the sudden stillness when a name is mentioned too casually. This is a city addicted to its own reflection, and every reflection is warped by whispers. By now you know the rhythm, the rise, the fall, the ruin, the profit. But what happens after all that? What remains when the last pamphlet fades, the last headline yellowed, the last sigh no longer echoing against drawing room walls? The answer stands before you in the mirror, wearing rouge and resolve, trembling with both shame and power. Because if the Georgian scandal was built on anything, it was tension between private appetite and public performance, between ruin and reinvention. Some didn't survive it, but many did, and some remarkably thrived. You think of Lady Worsley, dragged through court and caricature, only to walk out with more fans than foes. Or Lord H., whose exposure led to a nervous breakdown and then a bestseller. Even the courtesans, the servants, the mistresses all played the game with their own kind of genius. Some used sex, others used silence. The smartest ones used scandal itself as a ladder, step by treacherous step. You wander into a bookstore, the kind that sells both poetry and poison. Tucked between leather volumes of theology and translations of Ovid, you find a slim, anonymous book titled Reflections on Modern Morality. It's not by a philosopher. It's by a former courtesan, her name never printed, but her voice unmistakable. She writes, "Scandal is truth exposed too soon. It is the bruise on power before the skin breaks." You flip through pages describing balls where invitations were traded like favors, parlors where secrets were bought with glances, and bedchambers where silence was the most practiced skill. Her tone is calm, unsentimental. She's not angry. She's not even bitter. She's just documenting the world as it was, and as it still is. Because that's the final trick, isn't it? Georgian gossip never really died. It evolved. It put on a new wig, changed its perfume, opened a social media account. The mechanics are the same. The stage is different. You can trace a straight line from Covent Garden scandal sheets to celebrity exposes, from ducal pamphlets to viral threads. We still trade in reputation. We still fall for the curated ruin of the beautiful. And deep down, we still love watching powerful people get caught doing the things we all secretly want to do. A young couple walks past the window. One whispers to the other, eyes lit with the thrill of freshly overheard drama. You smile. Somewhere, a new story is being born. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. That hardly matters. What matters is that it will be believed, repeated, reshaped, retweeted if need be. And like everything else in this city, it will be for sale. And that's your final lesson from Georgian London. Scandal isn't a mistake. It's a mirror. Performance. A product. And like any good story, it lasts only as long as we're willing to watch. End of script. Sweet dreams.